Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Russell, although people tend to call me Russ for short, and I'm from Wisconsin, which is a Midwestern state in the United States of America, well known for its two magnificent Great Lakes, namely Lake Michigan and Lake Superior, with an interior of dreamy forests and ubiquitous natural farmland. I grew up in the delightful city of Elk Grove in an exquisite lakefront property with sensational panoramic views. At the time of my story, I resided in one of those typical ranch-style homes with both of my parents and my sporty, adventurous sister Carly. Wisconsin is also known as the Great White North, where we experience winter like few other places in Northern America, which is why they call this the frozen tundra, for indeed some of our cities are considered colder than places in Alaska. Growing up in the early 90s, my sister and I were incredibly privileged and fortunate to have a very idyllic, peaceful and pleasurable childhood, as our happy-go-lucky parents were mellow, long-suffering and undemanding people who barely ever got their feathers ruffled and never raised their voices at us once, nor did they ever swear or lose their tempers. For indeed, the only time I ever once heard my mother release an F-bomb is when she slammed her toe really hard into a wooden cabinet and hurt herself quite badly, and another time when she was removing a chocolate cake from the oven and unfortunately slipped and plunged the cake and its contents all over the floor. Both our fun-loving parents actively encouraged us to spend all our spare time out of doors. My father emphatically believed fresh air and exercise would make us hale and hearty and were essential tools for all growing kids. I always adored the panoramic, exquisite snow-covered white landscapes of the winter months and the large mountain slopes in Wisconsin. It enabled me to develop a reverent passion for challenging winter sports like cross-country skiing, snowboarding and snowshoeing, as there was no end to the fun activities you can engage in with the snow. Little did I realise that my appreciation for the cold weather and this intriguing white substance from nature would ultimately impact my career path later on in life, as you will soon discover. My first idiosyncratic, unorthodox encounter with the hairy critter, otherwise known as Bigfoot, was on our own property, where the rear of our land was surrounded by a dense area of woodgreen, consisting of very mature, statuesque aspen, beeches and birch trees. Those were the days when we never had heard of Bigfoot before, so my first encounter with the strange creature was nothing short of incredulous. It all began in the winter of 1993, when my sister and I constructed a very sizable, cheerful-looking snowman in our backyard, which was something we did every single winter like clockwork after heavy snowfall. After all, every backyard should be graced with the presence of a quintessential snowman in winter. Our snowman would wear my father's old black bowler hat on his head, with blue marbles for its eyes, a massive carrot for its nose, and several red glacé cherries for its mouth, along with a striped scarf that belonged to my father around its neck. It would seem that the nose and the mouth kept needing replacing regularly because the carrots and cherries would mysteriously vanish, and we were perturbed as to who or what was pinching the carrots and the cherries. I was secretly convinced my father was playing tricks on us, as he had a wacko sense of humour at the time and was the greatest trickster of all. but he insisted that he was not stealing our carrots, nor taking the cherries. One day my sister Carly and I awoke to find that not only were the carrots and cherries mysteriously missing from the snowman, but there was actually a long trail of telltale footprints that led directly from the snowman into the heart of the woods. "Look," I said to my sister, "I think these footprints belong to the perpetrator of our missing carrots and cherries." "But the feet are so big," said my sister, putting her foot into the huge impression in the ground. "Look how big the print is compared to my own foot." I was stunned by how tiny my sister's foot was compared to these footprints in the snow. Who could have feet this big, I wondered, for you'd have to be like a giant to have feet this large. It was a curious conundrum for me. In our eager enthusiasm and heightened curiosity, we began to follow the trail of footprints directly in the snow to the heart of the woods. Imagine our immense surprise when they led directly to a large igloo-like structure that would have been very inconspicuous to us if the footprints hadn't been such a clear giveaway sign. Whoever this individual was, he clearly wasn't very good at concealing his tracks. The sizable rounded shell-like structure was exceedingly large and very cleverly constructed, with a vast framework of tree branches that were used as the scaffolding that was cemented together with dense quantities of snow. The snow-covered frame was set against a rocky outcrop that I imagine provided a great windbreak. My sister and I crept up to the igloo to peek inside, and we could see this large bundle of grey fur lying curled up in a large ball, with its back facing away from us. It looked like a massive fur coat lying in this space. The strange critter appeared to be snoring loudly, and he sounded exactly like my dad, who really does snort like a pig when he sleeps. Something which drives my mother insanely crazy. At first I thought it must be a bear that was lying in this igloo, but then bears don't have grey hair, do they? I also remembered the footprints in the snow that clearly did not belong to a bear. Besides, I've never heard of a bear coming out of hibernation to pinch a few carrots and a handful of glacé cherries. My sister and I cautiously crept away from the shelter and surreptitiously hid behind a very large, sizable birch tree, while I deliberately threw a large snowball at the igloo, in the hope that we could rouse the unsuspecting critter out of its deep slumber. And it seemed to have worked. Fortunately, our snowball did make a loud crashing sound as it thumped against the opening. That was when we saw the massive critter tentatively stick his huge pyramid-shaped head out of the igloo, with a startled, bewildered and befuddled expression upon his long, wrinkled, human-like face. He began furtively looking around him, to the left and to the right, and to the front and to the back, and then prudently inspecting his structure to ensure that it wasn't falling apart. We watched in awe as this elderly critter hobbled around his den, examining it from every side and angle, moving ever so slowly. He proceeded to cement some more snow onto the igloo with his massive hands, and finally satisfied, retreated back into his structure. I think he must have believed that some snow had literally come off his igloo, and he was trying to fix it. My sister and I stared at this thing in disbelief, because this doddering critter looked exactly like a man, but he wasn't fully human, as there were fleeting ape-like influences to his humanoid appearance. We could tell that the critter was long in the tooth, for he shuffled around like a geriatric old man, and looked dithery and muddled, which made him rather endearing to us. I would describe him as being about 7 foot tall and 500 pounds, and covered with long, flowing, exceedingly matted grey hair, with bald patches on his knees, parts of his chest, and under his arms. I could discern that the shrivelling, enfeebled critter was suffering from the withering, decaying effects of severe muscular wastage, and was very thin, emaciated and lanky, but I believe at one time in his prime he must have been very large indeed. I was not afraid of the critter at all, because he seemed like a likeable, disorientated old man, and I actually felt incredibly sorry for him, alone in the snow like this. "What is he?" asked my sister earnestly, as we made tracks back to the house. "He looks human, but not quite human. You know what I mean." "I don't know," I said, "but I think that whatever he is, he's very old and is struggling to survive. It's hard out here in the cruel elements, and judging by how slow and dithery he is, I can't imagine that he's much of a hunter. I honestly don't know how he's managing to survive out there, on his own. Nature can be so cruel. That's why he probably was pinching our carrot and our glacé cherries. We must help him, said my sister. I feel ever so sorry for him. He looks so lost and confused. I mean, where is his family? Should they not be taking care of him? Why have they abandoned him like this? Well, maybe they're migrants, I suggested, and left him behind for the winter because he's too slow to accompany them to a warmer place. I knew I wanted to help the strange critter living in the igloo, for who or whatever he was most certainly past his prime, and desperately needed our help. And if he'd been stealing the carrots from our snowman, he must be very hungry indeed, and that bothered me greatly. Over the weeks that followed, my sister and I would throw snowy balls at the igloo to awaken the critter from his sleep. He would rustle around in the igloo, hobbling out of the opening, and he would find apples, carrots, brown bread and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches outside his igloo. We would hide behind a tree, watching the critter. He would look so puzzled as he studied the food on the ground, and his expression was so dumbfounded and astonished. We would watch him scratching his head, and the wrinkles on his forehead would crinkle up deeply, as if he was wondering where on earth the food had come from. On one occasion, a large bird flew over the igloo-like structure, and his eyes lit up brightly, and he waved excitedly at the bird. I'm convinced he thought the bird had sent him manna from heaven. Sometimes when we left food out for him, he would look around him with his concerned deep eyes, looking from the right and to the left, and even up the trees, as if trying to discern where the food had mysteriously appeared from. And then he would quickly grab the food and hastily retreat back into the igloo, almost as if he was worried that something or someone would try and steal it away from him. I knew that we were making his life a whole lot easier and better by bringing him food, and it felt good to help the poor critter. One day we threw a snowball at the igloo, and the critter did not respond to us at all, and that happened for several consecutive days. By this stage I was certain that the critter was dead, and of course I was right, because we went into the cave and surreptitiously reached into the opening to poke the critter very hard with a stick. He did not respond to us at all, so we poked him even harder, and he still did not react. That was when I reached out to touch the critter with my hand, and he was as hard as a brick and as solid as ice. The poor critter must have died in his sleep, and my sister and I began to cry because we had grown so fond of him. For several days my sister and I spent ages digging a hole in the ground for the critter, and we dragged him along the ground and pushed him into the shallow grave. We conducted our own little funeral service for him because he was so alone in the world, and we felt that he deserved to have a decent send-off. I don't know why we never told our parents about this incident, but then my sister and I were never big talkers at the very best of times, and our parents really never knew what we got up to anyway. Fast forward to my late 20s, when after being a rookie for a few years, I eventually became a fully fledged snowcat operator, and by this time in my life, regretfully I had 2 failed marriages behind me, and was getting married for the 3rd and hopefully final time. My parents were despairing with me over my inability to keep my wives happy, and blamed me for the demise of both of my relationships. You know what your problem is, darling? You're not giving your wives enough attention, my mother moaned at me. You need to spoil them, and give them compliments once in a while. What exactly do you mean? I asked her. Oh, Russ, my mother would groan. Did I not teach you anything growing up? You need to say things like, darling, your hair looks so beautiful today, and I love your dress. But what if I don't like her hair, I said. And what if I don't like her dress? Just say it, my mother snapped. Even if you don't mean it, and if she asks you if her bum looks fat in her dress, for goodness sake make sure you say no, because no woman needs to hear the truth. Why? I asked. Why would I lie to my wife? Because I say so, that's why, said my mother. And then she continued, when did you last tell your wife that you loved her? Well, I told her once, I said. Isn't that enough? No, it's not, darling, said my mother. You need to say it often, Russ. Women need to feel loved. It's important to tell them that you love them often. She continued in her instruction. You should occasionally buy your wife a fancy bouquet of flowers. Women love flowers. And chocolates, of course. Then occasionally take her out for a romantic candlelit dinner. You have to put some effort into your relationship, Russ, darling, because everything in life takes work. You know, Russ, what it's like when you're fixing the snow after the skiers have messed it up. It takes hours of work for you in that snowcat of yours to smooth out all their mess. It's the same with the marriage, she told me. It takes work, plenty of commitment, and lots of appreciation. I don't want to make excuses for myself, as my mother made some valid points, but I do think my job as a snow groomer had a great deal to do with the failure of my 2 former marriages, as both my wives felt that I was never around for them in the evening for that quintessential glass of white wine and a cosy dinner for 2. And even when I was around, I was never much of a talker. It would seem that being a poor communicator and a very contained person only caused my wives to become more embittered towards me. I have learnt that divorce is not uncommon among people working in the night shift, especially during the weekends when couples enjoy being social together, and both my wives were always on their own at social functions, and they hated feeling like a wallflower at these events. When most people pack up to return home after a heavy day at work, I'm invariably only just getting started. I really love and appreciate my job on the ski slopes as a snowcat operator, where I spend hours at a time with myself, listening to my stereo music, undoing what the skiers spent the day doing as they roughed up and messed up the ski slopes substantially, which is where using my snowcat comes into play. Over the years, I've learnt to skillfully and masterfully manoeuvre the snow from the slopes back uphill towards the centre of the trails. Then I resurface and refresh the snow, following all the grooming plans that I've been given for that particular night by my superior. I truly consider my job the most exciting, rewarding job in the world, because it really is like a sport in a manner of speaking. There are, of course, times when you get motion sickness from all the constant jerking around in the vehicle and the swinging back and forth in the snowcat, which can, of course, induce feelings of nausea and queasiness. It is very stressful when visibility is not good, so over the years I've used the tree line as a reference point and guide. There have been times that I've actually slipped and skidded badly and literally fallen out of my cab, and that is not funny, I assure you. On those occasions I've literally had to drag myself out of the snow and get back into my snowcat, because there's no one to help you. It can be incredibly lonely out there, as you're all on your own. It's important not to be afraid of the blizzards or heavy wind conditions, as you have to operate the cat in all manner of conditions, so it's not for the faint-hearted, let me tell you. You have to learn the mountains you're grooming like the back of your hands, taking into account where you might have a sheer cliff face on one side and trees on another, and you cannot see a thing. Sometimes it's a little like driving a powerful vehicle blindfolded over treacherous, slippery and dangerous terrain. One evening I wasn't feeling at all well. I remember I had a throbbing headache, a sore throat, and was coughing quite a lot. I decided to take a medication that I didn't know at the time had sedative-like side effects. Not good when you're operating heavy machinery, I can assure you of that. I returned to my snowcat, which was covered in an ethereal blue glow from the full moon that night. As I began to groom the slope, I became increasingly disorientated and groggy, but instead of having the common sense to call it a day, I continued to groom the slopes, and at one point I got out of my cab to examine something on the ground. I could feel that my temperature was soaring, and although it was -2 degrees outside, I was sweating like a pig. I got back into my cab and I saw the hazy, somewhat blurry silhouettes of 2 dark figures playing together in the snow, throwing snowballs at each other. They were running around and chasing each other, seemingly having the time of their lives, but it was 11 o'clock at night. I could hardly believe it. They were a fair distance away from me, so I couldn't see them very clearly, but I do remember thinking that no one should be playing on the slopes at this time of night or messing up the snow like this for my snowcat to fix. I got out of my cab to have a better view of the 2 mysterious people, and due to my groggy, disorientated state, I really wasn't looking to where I was going, and I slipped, lost my balance, and went rolling and plummeting down the steep slope towards the 2 people like a massive lumbering dough ball, when finally I reached the bottom and came to a grinding halt. I could hear 2 feet racing towards me very fast, and I looked up to see 2 faces staring down at me that were clearly wondering what the strange thing was that had come tumbling down the hill at such an insane speed. The 2 critters that were checking me out possessed the same pyramid-like faces of the critter I'd encountered as a child. I was so stunned by what I was seeing that my eyes grew as round as saucers and my mouth dropped open. I don't know who was more bewildered, the critters or me. For a moment all three of us were locked in a stare, none of us quite knowing how to react to each other. I felt so drunk and intoxicated from the medication, but that did not impair the escalating terror rising up in my heart. I knew I was in the presence of two of the most intimidating, enormous critters that I have ever encountered in my entire life, and something dangerous and as threatening as a lion or a tiger, believe me. Without question, these critters were majestic, lofty, powerful, and exceedingly formidable. When you're face to face with something this colossal, you become judiciously aware of how small and vulnerable you are in the great scheme of things. I would say these critters were easily 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, and 3 feet across the shoulders, and they were covered in jet black long hair that was a little scant on the midsection, only serving to highlight the taut, powerful muscle definition beneath. I could see this clearly in the light of the full moon. The critters both possessed very powerful shoulders, overlong arms, and short, stocky legs, and their deep-set dark eyes reflected a very menacing red eye-shine. In my terror and desperate need to escape, it would seem that my ungainly body malfunctioned, while my brain kept screaming at me to run. The only way I can describe it to you, it was like my brain disengaged and misfired, and my faulty body failed to start up like an old rusty car engine. I became cloddish, uncoordinated and oafish. I tried to gain my composure, staggering precariously to my feet, but in my gallant, courageous, best efforts to manoeuvre my body efficiently off the ground, I slipped and lost my balance, not just once, but 3 more consecutive times. I believe my terror had stiffened and frozen my body like a large block of cement, and it didn't help that the woozy, sedative effects of my medication were fogging up my mind considerably. I could tell by the expressions on the critter's face that they thought I was exceedingly clumsy and graceless. I discerned that my uncoordinated staggering around the snow, like an inebriated, sizzled and impaired drunk, was a source of great amusement for them both. I promise you that those critters were snorting so much that I sensed that they were definitely laughing at me, and having a joke at my expense. After a while, one critter began to feel desperately sorry for me. He gathered me in his overlong arms like a bird with a broken wing that he wanted to rescue, throwing me gently over his shoulders like a large sack of oranges, carrying me up the steep, precarious slope with effortless ease and with a seamless fluidity, without a single jolt, while his friend walked by his side, and they chatted merrily together like two people talking a strange language. Finally the critter plonked me on the ground next to my snowcat. He then turned around with his friend, and it was like they were gliding as they moved away with such an extraordinary grace down the steep slope. They swung their arms backwards and forwards. I watched them in awe for a long while from my snowcat as they continued to throw snowballs at each other, seemingly unfazed by the fact that I could see them clearly. I kept thinking to myself, am I rarely seeing this, or is this the side effect of my cold medication playing tricks on me? The next few days at work, many of the snowcat operators were commenting about the large trails of human-like tracks seen all over the steep hills, and people were very floored about the size of these imprints that had messed up the snow. I kept my mouth shut and never said a single word about what I'd seen on the slopes. All these years later, I'm still grooming the snow in the late afternoon, after the slopes are closed once the skiers have left. There have been occasions I've sensed my snowcat being watched, or seen a large tree in the wood green suddenly taking on a human form and moving, and that's when I instinctively know I'm perceiving the critters that I now know to be Bigfoots. In truth, I'm glad they're out there watching over the slopes, as they've never given us any problems and seem benevolent and benign, although I must confess an encounter with one of these critters can be very spooky indeed. I'm glad to confess that I'm still married to wife number 3, who is not concerned by the strange hours I work, and one of the reasons I think my marriage actually works is my wife doesn't expect me to make her happy. She believes everyone is responsible for their own happiness, and I love the fact that she accepts me for who I am and doesn't expect me to be a huge talker. Instead, she enjoys talking and I love to listen, so our relationship really works. I've learnt to tell her I love her often, but I draw the line at pretending she looks good in a dress if she doesn't, and if her bum looks big, I'd probably tell her, so I'm not big on the lie thing. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I believe this must be it, said my father, taking a swift left-hand turn through the tall, lofty trees, where we arrived at an old rusted cattle gate that looked as if it was over 100 years old, possibly older. My father climbed out of his silver Mercedes and casually walked over to the cattle gate to open it as wide as he could. The gate, with its extensively large cattle grid, creaked and groaned on its hinges, almost as if it had not been oiled for over a century. I noticed the driveway that snaked through the gate was narrow and obscure, heavily fringed by a labyrinth of tall trees, a higgledy-piggledy mix of indigenous specimens typical to the bluegrass state. This was the quintessential road through the woods, you could say. It would have been easily missed or overlooked if you hadn't been paying attention, or if you hadn't known it was there. My father made a satisfied grunt, a purring sound he'd commonly make when he was terribly pleased with himself for his accomplishments, like when he fixed a kitchen cupboard when it had fallen off its hinges for my mother, or sorted out a block drain at home. I suspected he was privately congratulating himself for finding the proverbial needle in the haystack, as Dogwood Manor was discreetly hidden behind these sprawling groves of trees. If my father could have clapped himself on the back, he probably would have done so. I admit I was impressed that he'd found Dogwood Manor, even though he knew Kentucky almost as well as the taxi drivers in London, England, know the length and breadth of the entire square mile of the city, without needing any GPS navigating devices at their disposal. I know this from a recent trip that I had to London. I well knew from past experience that there were indeed secret little pockets of Kentucky, ambiguous obscure places far off the beaten track that could lead you astray geographically if you didn't know where you were going, and as a consequence you could get hopelessly lost like a ship out at sea. If I'd been wearing my father's shoes and been seated in the driving seat of his Mercedes, I would almost have certainly missed the narrow gap through the trees, even if my GPS had told me I'd arrived at my desired destination. I would have been absolutely certain the GPS had got it horribly wrong, as no one ever said technology was perfect every time. My father pointed to the dubious-looking sign, obstructed by a low overhanging tree branch that was blocking out the faded writing. It read Dogwood Manor. "You'd think they'd make the sign-post clearer," said my father, sounding a tad indignant. "I mean, the sign is so discreetly hidden behind the trees. How can they possibly expect anybody to find this place if it's not clearly marked, and shrouded from the road so you can't even see it? Sometimes I despair of people. It's pretty logical and straightforward to have a sign that should be seen very clearly from the road so that any passing traffic will know exactly where this place is. But this one is buried away, almost as if the owners of Dogwood Manor themselves don't want anybody to find their property. Never mind, I'm going to make amends about that. Make sure that today everybody knows exactly where Dogwood Manor is. I can taste a sail on my tongue, like the salt in the sea air." "Don't be ridiculous, Dad," I chuckled. "How can you taste a sail? You sound as if you're talking about a T-bone steak served with a side of chips. It doesn't work like that, Dad, I'm most sure." "Oh, but sometimes it does, son," said my father. "Your instincts can be as sharp as a razor, I find. I've been in real estate for a long time, son," he said, fixing his steely grey eyes on me. "There are times you get a profound sense that something is going to bite, like when you go fishing. Remember when we went fishing a lot when you were a little boy? And when you cast out your line into the lake, you would sometimes say to me, 'Dad, I feel lucky today.' And you usually were. I do remember that rather well. Haven't you had days, son, when you just know things are going to go your way? You just sense it in your guts?" "I'm not sure," I said, reflecting on my father's words. "When I get up, I'm never certain what the day is going to bring. But there are some days that feel better than others, I will admit.
but it still doesn't mean the day will work out right in the end. I certainly didn't get any gut feeling today, if that's what you want to know, that things would turn out fine. I only came along today to stop Mum nagging me to find out more about what you do as an estate agent. She seems to have this terrible intrinsic fear that if I don't find a career path soon, I'll be left behind, as all my friends seem to know what they want to do with their lives. Well, I wouldn't let that worry you, son. When I was your age, I had absolutely no clue what I wanted to do with my life. So you're not alone on that front. Your mother can overreact at times, but don't tell her I told you that. If you must know, I fell into becoming an estate agent quite by lucky chance. My friend's father happened to be an estate agent, and one day we both helped him out in selling a property. I remember thinking, I could do this, and I never looked back. In the end, he was the first one that gave me my first job. I was a little older than you are at the time. You mark my words, your mother's worrying about nothing. Everything will eventually fall into place. In my experience, it always does. So just you wait and see. And I've got a good feeling that it's going to be a good day. Sometimes it's about getting out of bed on the right side, when everything that day seems to flow with what I would describe as perfect synchronicity. Oh, is that what they call it, Dad? I teased. I can't say I can taste the so-called good flavour in the air that you seem to be talking about. But let's just say I'm going to take what you say with a pinch of salt, Dad, or with a healthy scepticism. Ah, that's what I like to hear, son. One thing I like to teach you and your sister is not to believe everything you hear, especially if it's written in the press or reported on the mainstream media, as so much stuff is fully manipulated. I dare say this day is going to be a whole new experience for you, isn't it, son? I'm very glad you came along with me today, even if I was under the duress of your well-meaning mother, said my father, looking at me approvingly. I have to admit, son, you scrub up well. You really do. I'm awfully proud of you, you know. You do look the part. Even your mother looked impressed this morning when she saw you wearing that blue pinstripe suit of yours. Don't tell her I told you this, but she had tears in her eyes. I suspect your mother's beginning to realize you're growing up so fast. It's not easy for her to accept that her 18-year-old boy is becoming an adult. Between you and me, I know she's dreading the day when you finally leave home. If she had her way, you'd be a kid forever, never grow up, and never leave home. That's what she would really like. Dad, I'm 18. Of course I'm grown up. I'm not a pet that's going to stay at home forever, even if that's what Mum wants. You know what she's like. She gets emotional about absolutely everything. Even if I go away for a weekend, she's upset about that. She claims to miss me so very much. She's also like that with Kate. God forbid we both leave home. She'll fall apart. Well, can you blame her, son? You're her favourite son, aren't you? And Kate her favourite daughter. Well, it's difficult not to be her favourite son, Dad, since she doesn't have any more, I teased. Nor does she have another daughter, apart from Kate. The suit really does look great on you, son, said my father, giving me a wink. Those shoes of yours are so polished I could probably see my reflection in them. You polished them good, son. Military men know about polishing shoes. My father was in the Navy, you know. I never knew a day when his shoes didn't shine like the morning sun. Well, I'm not exactly comfortable wearing this suit, Dad, if you must know, I said, flinching. I just don't think I'm a suit guy. I think I would have been better off being a Buddhist monk or something. They wear comfortable, loose-fitting orange clothes, don't they? I said, playing awkwardly with the zooty tie my mother had insisted I'd worn today, which made me feel as if I'd been trussed up like a turkey. I prefer to wear trendy, comfortable clothes, but suits can be so tiresome, so uncomfortable, especially when the weather is hot. Well, then you're lucky, son. It's spring, so the weather isn't exactly warm today. You'll be fine wearing that suit. You young generation don't seem to appreciate some of the old, well-tested ways of presenting yourself. Well, I just don't get why I can't wear anything I like, Dad. Surely times have changed and suits have gone way out of fashion. Isn't it better to feel comfortable in what you wear? Business suits are so stuffy. If you look at some of those high-tech places, many of them just wear fashionable clothes, like they do at Apple. Not in this game, son, they don't. If you want to become a real estate agent and follow in my footsteps, then you need to look the part. Nobody wants to buy a house from someone who looks like they've been taking a long leisurely stroll down the beach, wearing denim shorts with a Hawaiian shirt, and have soap drying in their damp hair. In the world of real estate, appearances are absolutely everything. And you know what they say, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. I sniggered. Is that really true, Dad? Isn't that a bit of old hat? Of course it's true, son. Never was a truer word ever spoken. When people buy a property, they often say it's in the first few seconds that a potential buyer will make up their mind about a place. So presentation is absolutely everything. Why do you think houses are often very cleverly staged by skilled, masterful designers, so that buyers can envisage themselves living in that place? You see, son, I hate to tell you this, but in my experience, some people have no imagination whatsoever. I don't mean to be brutally unkind, but it is true. So if they see an empty space, it can be hard for them to imagine living there. That's where the designers are called into play to work their magic. When you kit the place out with furniture, people can begin to see themselves living in that place. If the staging has succeeded in making the place sumptuously cozy and pleasing to the eye, you pretty much got a sale in the bag. So as far as I'm concerned, staging is well worth the money and the investment. Wow, you do surprise me, Dad. So it seems first impressions really are important then. Of course they're important, son. When a potential client visits a property on the market, and the place has got oodles and oodles of curb appeal and charm to attract them, it's a win-win situation. Ostensibly, an estate agent needs to present him or herself very well. If they look as if they've been dragged through a hedge backwards, it's not a pretty picture. It's like anything in life. You have to look the part, don't you? I have a friend who sold real estate for a living. One day she was running late for a couple of clients. She rocked up to show the people around the property. She had accidentally left her pajama bottoms under her dress, and they fell down to her feet in front of her clients. They took one look at her and her pajama bottoms and bolted out of the place like a bat out of hell, as if seeing her in such a dishevelled state had downgraded the value of the property. From that point onwards, she made an extra effort to look her very best, and never ever forgot to remove her pajama bottoms, said my father, chuckling. Well, that must have been rather amusing to watch, although rather humiliating for the woman. Although I dare say the people concerned were rather shallow and short-sighted, to run away from a property just because the woman's pajama bottoms fell to her feet. But it doesn't change the fact that I don't feel comfortable wearing a suit, Dad. Even if it makes me look smart and professional, I would still prefer to feel comfortable. Well, you can thank your lucky stars then, son, that you weren't living in the 1800s. In those days, people wore top hats and tails as a daily routine. Women wore corsets, and they were always trussed up to the nines, let me tell you. It couldn't have been desperately comfortable back then, but it was the order of the day, wasn't it? They were always smartly attired. It went with the territory of being a gentleman or a lady. I suppose, then, I have to be grateful for small mercies, Dad, I said, with a touch of sarcasm in my voice. I can't imagine what it would have been like living back then. I saw some old footage, you know, of the 1800s on TikTok. And you're right, everyone looked considerably smart. But there were horse-drawn carriages, and there were trams everywhere. It was fascinating to watch. But you're right, I did notice everyone looked terribly smart back in the day, much more so than they do now. I wonder what they would think of how we dress today, and how casual some of us have become over the years. My father nodded. They would probably not be very impressed or inspired by us. To tell you the truth, son, I'll let you into a little secret. I am rather chuffed to be selling Dogwood Manor for the O'Reilly family. But don't tell Philip Wensleydale I told you so. Thankfully the O'Reillys have fixed Dogwood Manor up remarkably well. Although, to be fair, they've kept it in reasonably good condition over the years, renting it out to a couple of well-to-do families. The mansion was built in 1873. Philip Wensleydale, the estate agent I work with, visited the place last week. He excitedly told me all about it. He was very pleased about this open day today, that he organised well in advance. Well, if that's the case, Dad, why on earth are you presenting Dogwood Manor today, and not Philip Wensleydale? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. You haven't even seen the property. That's a whole nother story in itself. As I was saying, son, I consider it a privilege to be able to sell a house like Dogwood Manor. In a nutshell, the O'Reillys never wanted to sell. It's been in the family line for generations, as is often the case with old ancestral homes like this. They have some kind of inverted loyalty towards the place, which is perfectly understandable. It makes them feel rather disinclined to sell. But things have changed exponentially for the O'Reilly family. They are moving to New Zealand, so they decided to restore Dogwood Manor about 6 months ago, for the purposes of putting it onto the market to sell, so that they could acquire the best possible price for the place. Well, I suppose that makes good financial sense, I said. Well, it does from their perspective, said my father. They don't want to be worrying about a family property of theirs in America while living abroad. They feel they need to let it go, although I hasten to say that Mr. O'Reilly is very sad and rather reluctant to be selling it up, especially with Dogwood Manor being in such mint condition. I think the poor man has had some unsettling visions of his deceased ancestors waving their hands in indignation at him, persuading him that he can't abandon the family heritage like this. Well, that is what he told Philip Wensleydale, I believe. I guess selling the place is an emotional tug-of-war for the man. Well, I'm not surprised to hear that, I said. I imagine it must be rather hard to sell an old family ancestral home that's been in the family for many generations. I don't think I would find it remotely easy to do that. You feel as if you have a duty of responsibility, an obligation of care for the place, that your previous descendants down the family line took charge of. And if you sell it, there are no guarantees that the place will be well maintained. Why are they moving to New Zealand anyway? I asked curiously. That's a long way to go from home, is it not? My father rubbed a hand over his lip and paused for a brief moment as he reflected over my question. Well, I believe the owner of Dogwood Manor, Mr. O'Reilly, has been offered a prominent position of running an up-and-coming American company in New Zealand, which is also being started up in Australia at the same time. From what I gather, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that he would be foolish to refuse, with a kind of pay package that is irresistible and almost impossible to turn down. Beyond that, I think the family fancy a change of scene, and the O'Reillys like the idea of moving to New Zealand. It's a beautiful country, I believe. Well, it may be beautiful, but it's a whole lot different from America, Dad. I wouldn't personally want to do it myself. Maybe so, son, said my father, but they seem to be set on this move. So I hope it works out for them, I really do. Now I better get this place clearly marked, hadn't I? If we fancy getting any sales today, that is. The O'Reillys would like a quick sale, with as little complications as possible. A cash sale would do very nicely indeed. But do you think a place like Dogwood Manor will sell quickly, Dad? I asked him. I mean, by the looks of things, this place is out in the sticks. It's a historical home that is only likely to attract a certain type of person. I'm no professional, but that's a good guess on my part. Besides, it comes with a hefty price tag, doesn't it? So you have to have plenty of money to buy a place like this. It's not that bad, son. Yes, the place may be expensive, but Dogwood Manor is a great investment to a keen buyer. It's solidly built on very strong foundations. As far as I'm concerned, it's a buyer's dream, if they love old houses, that is. And the nearest town, believe it or not, is not very far away. Yes, I do think the place will tick the right boxes for the right buyer, if they come along, given its historic lineage, which will be attractive to many. We just have to hope we won't have to wait for too long. You can sit on some houses for ages and ages, believe me, I know, and there's nothing more frustrating than that. But I think Dogwood Manor will be snapped up pretty quickly. My father climbed back out of his Mercedes again. I wondered why he'd bothered to get back into the car, in the first place, only to get out of it again like a yo-yo in full swing. But that was my energetic father for you, always moving around like a restless animal in a zoo enclosure. I knew that my father needed to erect his estate agent's signs, as he did on every open day, when presenting a property to the public, as a matter of routine. I sat in the passenger side seat rather patiently, while I heard my dad opening up the trunk. He scrambled around in the back of his Mercedes, with much scratching and squeaking, to remove his quintessential tools of the trade. My father marched in his very debonair suit, wearing his pristine leather shoes from the cattle gate to the trees that fringed the borders of the road. I could hear him noisily thumping around rather awkwardly in the ground, banging away as if he was digging a large outside trench. I could hear him muttering under his breath, "Damn, this ground is rock hard. How am I supposed to get this thing in?" I happily listened to some classic rock on the radio, beating my feet against the floor of his Mercedes in time to the music. It was going to be a long, drawn-out day, I thought to myself. I was already dreading it, but I had agreed to come here today, with much persuasion from my mother, who had said it would do me the world of good to see what my father did for a living. "The way I see it," my mother had said to me, "you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, love, as to what path to take in your career. It won't do you any harm at all to spend a day with your father, to learn a bit about his business. It might actually be quite inspirational for you." "Inspirational," I'd said, letting out a mock laugh. "Are you kidding me, Mum? There's nothing remotely inspirational about selling houses. It's a pretty mundane job, I bet." My mother had raised a brow. "Don't knock it until you try it, son. You might be pleasantly surprised about your father's job. Your father has told me some stories over the years that would make your hair curl." "That," I said sarcastically, "I find rather difficult to believe." I heard my father grunting as he finally managed to put the for sale sign into the stiff, unyielding earth with a mighty, forceful thud. I was to discover later that he'd painstakingly placed the for sale and open day signs outside the entrance that faced the road, popping up a handful of helium balloons on the stand, blue and white I believe they were, and that was to draw attention to the sign, so potential buyers driving down the road would be fully alerted to it. My father sashayed back to his Mercedes, crunching pebbles beneath his perfectly polished shoes. He grunted as he climbed in beside me, sinking gratefully into the leather seats, bringing behind him a trail of dust into the car that made me wheeze, cough, and splutter. His perfect shoes were now covered in a layer of thick dust, which my father hurriedly wiped away with a white handkerchief that he retrieved from one of his pockets. "Damn, it's dusty out there. I'm sorry I've made you cough, son. Goodness gracious me, look at my shoes. They were only polished moments before, and now they look filthy. You'll be glad to know I've put the for sale signs and balloons up, so hopefully we can attract some interested parties today. Keep your fingers crossed, will you, son? We could do with some luck on our side." "You think the sign will attract people, do you?" I asked my father curiously. "Well, I don't see why not, son. But there is one thing I've learnt about open days over the years, and that is, well, working as an estate agent, I've learnt that they can be notoriously unpredictable. You can have a day when no one is biting the bait, and just before you pack up to leave, someone comes in unexpectedly. They offer you the asking price for your property. Your deadbeat day turns triumphant. Other times you have an open day, where everyone seems to be biting the bait. They appear to be excited and animated about the place you're showing. They kept telling you that they want to buy it, and that it's exactly what they're looking for. You get such positive feedback. You start to believe you will have an offer by the end of the day. But in the days that follow, nothing happens. So the day you thought was a great success ends up being a train smash. You don't hear a dicky bird from any of the people you thought were interested in buying the property. So it can really get you down at times. You have to learn to be stoic in this job. It's like betting on a horse that is a dead cert to win. And then the horse you think is going to win trails behind all the others and loses the race. So yes, in this job, it's always unpredictable. What exactly do you mean, Dad? I asked. I'm just saying, son, don't be fooled by outside appearances or first impressions. They can be incredibly misleading. Sometimes the most unlikely people, who do not look like they have a brass farthing to rub together, can be the ones that surprise you the most. The golden rule is to treat everyone with great respect, even if you feel they're messing you around, are time wasters. You get people who you think are stringing you along, wasting your time without any intention of buying. And the next thing you know, the joker you never took seriously for a second is the very person that puts in an offer for the house you're selling. So in this business you need to be prepared for all eventualities, all manner of surprises. No 2 days are the same in this business. I've been taken off guard more times than I care to remember, and met people from all walks of life. It sounds like it's more of a roller coaster ride than I imagined, I said. It sure is, son, said my father. He let out an amused chuckle. I'm glad you came with me, son, on this adventure. I apologize it's not an intrepid one, like when we went whitewater rafting together. But at least, on a house showing, you won't be flung into the rapids of the fast-moving water, like last time, and end up being beaten up by the waves. It'll be a lot smoother ride for you, son. Don't knock whitewater rafting, Dad. That was a fun holiday, and I really enjoyed myself. You didn't look like you were having fun at the time, son, my father teased, giving me an amused wink. Ostensibly, I think it's jolly good for you to learn about the world of real estate. There's lots to learn, but I cannot promise you it'll be busy today, as places like this in the middle of nowhere don't exactly have people queuing up in their droves to see them, so you could get rather bored. This is a select, exclusive property that attracts a very special buyer, who will have money and a penchant for historic homes. Having said that, Dogwood Manor is a buyer's dream, as I keep telling you. It's got character, charm, and oodles of history, so it will attract someone who appreciates that kind of thing. I'm most sure. It sounds like I'm going to be bored today, Dad. I can feel it in my bones. Don't say that, son. As I told you, I haven't seen Dogwood Manor myself yet. We will see it very shortly as we drive up this driveway. But as I was telling you, Philip Wensleydale was supposed to be presenting it today. He's only come down with appendicitis. He evaluated Dogwood Manor for the O'Reillys. He was the one that organised the open day. He was so excited about presenting it today. But it's not to be for him, I'm afraid. Philip has assured me that a wealthy couple called Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair have expressed a keen interest in seeing Dogwood Manor. He personally contacted them to tell them about the place. The Sinclairs tend to collect properties like houses and hotels on a monopoly board. I've already sold them 3 houses myself in these parts over the years, all that have a history attached to them. They are the kind of people that like buying property. Philip Wensleydale believes Dogwood Manor will almost certainly float their boat in every regard. I gather Mrs. Sinclair finds old houses steeped in history irresistible, so she may not be able to walk away from Dogwood Manor without putting in an offer for the place, so we need to keep our fingers crossed on that one. I believe the Sinclairs have 2 twin boys. They live in the old Louisville area, in a renovated Victorian home, but they have a few properties to their name. All of them are historical, I understand. Well, that's ridiculous, Dad. I've heard everything now, I said. If they're living in the old Louisville area, they're already surrounded by history. I mean, how many historic houses does one couple need? I'm sorry, I said, shaking my head in annoyance, but this is what bugs me about the insanely rich. I'm struck by their greed. It really bugs me, Dad, that some people have so much money, they spend it so frivolously, while others can't even afford to pay their bills. My father shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly, in a matter-of-fact way that he always did. Nothing ruffled my father's feathers. He always went with the flow of life, like a fallen autumn leaf on the water being directed by the current. The rich are the rich, son, and whether it's fair or not is really not something I want to dwell on right now, if you don't mind. It is true that some people have more money than common sense, if you ask me, but I dare say the Sinclairs will turn any property they buy into a wise investment, possibly rent it out, sit on it for a few years until it triples in value, and then finally sell it again. The one thing the rich are very good at doing, son, is turning their hands into making more and more money. Money they'll probably never need in a lifetime. But that doesn't seem to stop their earnest drive to make yet more money. In this profession, we don't complain about things like that. A sale is a sale as far as we're concerned. Besides, the Sinclairs are very good people. We've just got to get Mrs. Sinclair to bite the bait, because she would be the perfect buyer for Dogwood Manor. And furthermore, it would be a cash sale, which the O'Reillys would fully appreciate. Another thing to remember is they will preserve the integrity of the house. Nothing better than a cash sale as far as I'm concerned. It irons out all the complications and hold-ups you get in real estate. My father looked very smart on this open day, but then again he always did when he was selling houses. I had to admit he was not bad looking for a man in his late 40s. Even as his son, I recognized this fact. I could only hope I'd look so well turned out and cleanly shaven myself when I reached his age. He still had most of his silvery hair, although I'd noticed that there was a little patch on the top of his head that was getting significantly thinner, which seemed to alarm my father, who was showing a keen interest in hair implants, as he said he didn't want to grow bald. The thought seemed to genuinely alarm him. My mother would call my father her adorable silver fox. I did think his silver hair suited him. It matched his grey eyes, that were like the intriguing colour of dirty ice, and I mean that in a complimentary way. My father always kept himself trim. He didn't like doing excessive training or workouts at the local gym. He was too lazy to spend time doing structured workouts like that. He wasn't into that kind of thing. Instead, he'd take our 2 dogs at home out for a walk every single morning, and he reckoned it kept him in reasonably good shape, and I believe it did. I was used to my father slouching around our Kentucky home, wearing just a pair of shorts and a sloppy T-shirt, which he was so glad to put on after a hard day showing people around some rather opulent, illustrious-looking homes, with intimidating price tags. It was on the spring morning when we were going to showcase Dogwood Manor. We had the whole day ahead of us, and I noticed there was not a single hair out of place on my father's head. I could smell the appreciative musky scent of my father's aftershave that he'd worn since I was a little boy. So it was a smell I was acquainted with, and I always found oddly comforting. "Dogwood Manor," I said to my dad, as he eagerly pressed down the accelerator and drove down the narrow path through the trees. "Why is it called such a lovely name? I kind of like it. It was probably called Dogwood Manor because between the eclectic mix of indigenous woodland trees, so typical of Kentucky from oaks to maples and other specimens, the dogwoods are very predominant here. You can see there are lots of them, bursting with white blossom. They're quite a showy display, are they not?" "They are indeed," I said. "I love spring," said my father. "Everything comes to life at this time of year, does it not? Look how fabulously beautiful the countryside is at the moment. The dead look from the end of winter has almost certainly abated. It's a good time to sell a house, son. There's something a little bleak about selling places in winter, I find. They never look half as good. But with the dogwoods on display this morning, to match the name of the property, I think things are looking up for a potential sale. Don't you, son? I hope you're right, Dad. I'm afraid I'm not nearly as optimistic and upbeat as you are. But you're right. It's a beautiful spring day, and hopefully it'll attract some business for us. The road through the trees was a long, windy one, but eventually it opened out rather generously, and was surrounded either side by hilly pastures of the greenest grass you have ever seen in your life. It would seem the stone-washed grass of winter had retreated, like an old forgotten memory. There were perfect meadows for horses to frolic around in happily, in the spring sunshine, although on this occasion there were none around, which was an awful pity, for they would be a welcome sight on this expansive property, where they would almost certainly belong. We passed a red barn, and some smart-looking outbuildings, containing what looked like a mix of farming machinery, some of ancient origins, but all in good condition. There was a recently renovated stable block that had been painted in a crisp white colour. It was obviously prepared for any future owner to move in horses onto the property straight away. In a trice, Dogwood Manor slowly came into view, looking like a matchbox in the distance, getting bigger and bigger as we made our approach. The prepossessing red-bricked house was set up proudly against a cheerful hilly backdrop of green grass, impregnated with pretty spring flowers that were bursting all over the countryside. The manor house was nestled under the umbrella of a few grandiose ancient oak trees that were wearing the hallmarks of spring proudly on their branches, that were covered with a plethora of fresh leaves. The front yard was absolutely pristine, with neatly manicured flower beds and hedges that had been shaped to perfection by someone who clearly knew what they were doing with a pair of garden shears, and using some artistic ingenuity. The beautiful red-brick manor home wore its illustrious history with a pompous pride, like a grand overcoat, that made only two words come out of my mouth: "Oh, wow!" For me to be wowed by anything was unusual, as I was the kind of easy-going person that didn't get wowed by very much, until now, of course. Houses had never interested me much, but this place enchanted me. Dogwood Manor was like opening up a history book, shooting back in time on a time machine. I could almost imagine all the servants from yesteryear gathering around outside the property, like they do in the movies, as the original very pompous well-to-do owner returned home, seated in the back of his horse and carriage, with his wife at his side from a long journey. I could envisage these servants bowing their heads politely to greet their master as he entered the house with his beautiful wife, linking arms with him, wearing one of those extravagant resplendent gowns they wore in that time, that were tightly pinched in at the waist and boasted a full skirt, made out of the finest, most exquisite material. For a moment I was caught up in this revelry of the colourful inspirational snapshots of history that, for reasons I could not comprehend, engaged my full attention and flashed rather impertinently into my mind, almost as if I was watching a video of the people who had lived here at one point in time. I wondered as I scrutinised Dogwood Manor through the critical lens of my discerning eyes, whether other people visiting such a place would feel its history as much as I did. It was so tangible to me. I had never experienced a feeling like this before when visiting an old house. It was not that I thought for a fleeting moment that the house was possibly haunted. Indeed, such a thought never even crossed my mind or occurred to me. The house for me fully embodied the memories of those who'd lived there before, and their essences had somehow brought the house to life. It's a little like mixing many flavours together in a bowl of fruit punch, and then you end up with an interesting concoction of flavours, which has everybody asking you for your secret recipe, and even you don't remember how many strange eclectic mixes of flavours you put into the punch. The house was like that, flavoursome in its personality, wholesome in its warmth, and grand in its stateliness. Suddenly it made sense to me why some people were drawn to houses like this. I had always been the type of person that liked minimal design and cutting-edge architecture, but on seeing Dogwood Manor, prettily dappled in the morning light, impregnated with the memories of those long since dead, I suddenly realised how special this house actually was. "She's a beauty, is she not?" said my father, as if he was talking about an old boat that he'd fixed up. "They don't make houses like this any more, do they? And a house like this, said my father, turning to me, "will never age. You know that, son, don't you? We'll probably be outlived by this house."
What do you mean? I asked. Dogwood Manor is already ancient, is it not?
What I mean, son, is Dogwood Manor is an example of classic architecture, is it not? Do you know I have modern houses on my books, son, that in their time were really cutting edge, but now they look so out of date, passé and spent, like an athlete that has finished an arduous marathon, so to speak, and is about to pass out when he gets to the finish line. Let's just say, houses like this, even in 200 years, will never go out of fashion, because they're classic. That's why you can't go wrong investing in our rich heritage. It sounds to me, Dad, like we should keep our architecture strictly classical, I said reflectively. Then we would not spend so much time bulldozing modern developments to make way for new ones. I see it happening around me all the time, Dad. In built-up areas, that is. I think about the huge waste of money, where businesses bring down their multi-billion-dollar tower blocks to build new ones in their place that are even more high-tech and avant-garde. And for what, I ask you? It makes absolutely no sense at all. It's a pitiful waste of money. Why not build something that can be there for generations to come? Something beautiful that actually lasts, that future generations might actually admire. You make a very good point there, son. I continued to stare at Dogwood Manor in wondrous awe, wondering what it would feel like living in a place like this. I knew before even entering the house that it would have a grand staircase, large fireplaces, high ceilings, a grand hall, drawing room, and a feeling of space that swaddled you generously on every side. This was the kind of house that looked suitable for the lady of the manor to reside in. Whoever the family was that had lived here in the 18th century, they must have been a person with considerable clout. The movers and shakers of such a time, I suspect, who had considerable influence over the community. I noticed a pretty neat cluster of green ivy leaves growing up one side of the house, covering the pretty red bricked walls in a carpet of green foliage, which enhanced the red tones of the brick, making it look wholesome and welcoming. Dogwood Manor boasted large sash windows and a selection of columns outside the front entranceway that gave the mansion such curb appeal. I noticed under the oak trees were carpets of yellow daffodils. This was the perfect day to attract a good buyer. Even the weather looked like it would behave. The sky was a blissful cup of blue, without any white candy floss clouds in sight, so the day itself appeared to invite much promise. My father parked his Mercedes on the red brick driveway, and for a brief moment we sat there thoroughly enjoying the views over the mansion, without saying a single word together. And then it happened. My father's cell phone rudely encroached on the tranquil peace, like a disruptive kid throwing a noisy temper tantrum while you're listening to Beethoven and enjoying a glass of the finest Pinot Noir. It was that kind of interference we could well do without on this perfectly charming day, and my father's mood was suddenly peppered with umbrage as he looked at his phone, as if it was as repellent as a cockroach that he didn't want to pick up. I knew the beastly feeling only too well, as sometimes I abhorred answering the phone, especially at badly timed intervals such as this one. It didn't help, of course, that my dad's obtrusive, very uncourteous cell phone had one of the most nauseating ringtones that I have ever heard. It made our dogs at home jump out of their skins and begin to whine. The jarring noise bothered them as it did me. I tried to persuade my father on many occasions to change the ear-blasting ringtone, but he had never got around to doing it, or more to the point, maybe he didn't know how to change it, and was too proud to ask for any help in that regard. It was a reminder to me that my generation are a whole lot more savvy with technology. "Damn," said my father, his brow beginning to furrow into a long tapestry of crinkly lines. "Who's calling now?" He removed his cell from the hold-all and put it on loudspeaker mode so I could hear the conversation. My father never ignored withheld calls, as in his line of business a very important customer could potentially be on the line, so if someone was trying to sell him insurance, they'd likely get through to him. so he couldn't exactly block all the spam calls that came through to him, which was one of the things that put me off becoming an estate agent. I never liked to answer withheld calls. "Hello, Lawrence Vermicelli speaking. How can I help you?" my father answered. "Oh, is that you, Mr. Vermicelli? It's Rose Aubrey here. You remember me, don't you?" My father frowned, as in his business he got to meet so many people, so remembering names was not exactly his strong point. "You must forgive me, ma'am, but I'm not desperately good with names, you know. But your name does sound very familiar. Where do I know you from?" "Mr. Vermicelli, I'm your sister Iris, Vermicelli's next-door neighbour. Don't you remember me? I'm the one that has 3 Pekingese dogs. Remember little Purdy? Well, she lifted her leg on your brand new chinos. Don't you remember that?" she said, letting out a giggle. "You weren't best pleased at the time with her, were you, Mr. Vermicelli? You should have seen your face. You went as white as a sheet. I know I shouldn't have laughed, but it was hilariously funny at the time. I told you that Purdy only lifts her legs on things she likes, and she marked you with her approval. Do you remember that, Mr. Vermicelli?" "Oh, yes. How could I forget?" said my father. "It was the first time I was wearing those chinos. They were brand new, a gift from the wife they were. They never did quite recover from your dog's urine. I do remember you and Purdy very well. How are you doing, Rose? It's been a while." "I'm fine, Mr. Vermicelli, very well. But it's your sister Iris that I'm calling about." "Is Iris all right?" asked my father, suddenly looking as if he was going to have a panic attack, as the colour drained from his face. My father was terribly close to his sister Iris, and was very protective over her, as I was over my sister Kate. So hearing she might be in a spot of trouble was very upsetting for him. "I'm not sure, Mr. Vermicelli. That's the trouble. I'm afraid to say things were not looking good this morning for your sister Iris. I hate to tell you this, but she collapsed on my doorstep when popping around to give me some cuttings from her yard. I have to say, Mr. Vermicelli, she looked terribly jaundiced, a little green at the gills, if you know what I mean. She stood there for a second, handed me the cuttings, and she tried to say something. I think she said, 'I don't feel terribly well,' something like that. I couldn't be sure. I told her to come in at once and to take a seat, and I would make her a sweet cup of tea. Before she entered my doorway, she just passed out in front of me, collapsed on the floor in a heap. I got the shock of my life. For a moment, Mr. Vermicelli, I actually thought she was dead. She wasn't moving. Her eyes looked as fixed as a dead fish. It was too terrible for words. My Pekingese dogs were licking her all over the face, and Purdy was pressing her paws against Iris to try and wake her up. Purdy put her leg up on your sister's face and peed over her mouth, and that was when your sister came around, which was such a relief for me. I've never been so scared, Mr. Vermicelli. I thought Iris was dead, but I'm glad to say Purdy made me aware that your sister was still very much alive, which was a huge relief, let me tell you. She was cursing at my dog for peeing in her mouth, so she wasn't completely unconscious, I'm glad to say. I called an ambulance at once. She was taken to St. Joseph's Hospital in Lexington. Don't worry about her too much, Mr. Vermicelli. I'm sure she's going to do just fine. Well, that's what the EMTs told me, and I have no reason to doubt them." "You're saying my sister collapsed?" asked my father. "How did she collapse? It wasn't her blood sugar, was it? You do know she's a diabetic." "I'm not sure, Mr. Vermicelli, but I suspect it was probably her blood sugar. She did look very peaky and out of sorts when I saw her. I think you should go to the hospital to find out exactly what's going on. I do know the paramedics gave her an injection of note, and she seemed to improve at once after that. I knew I needed to phone you to inform you what was going on. But I do think it was probably connected to her blood sugar. In fact, I'm sure about it, as the medic was saying something about insulin. One of them had helped your sister out before in an emergency situation, I believe, and he recognized her at once. It seemed like she was in very good hands. Don't worry, Mr. Vermicelli. I'm sure she'll be fine. But I thought it was terribly important to get in touch with you. I found your number on Rose's cell phone, which is currently in my possession. Thank you, Rose, for giving me a call. I do appreciate it very much. No problem, Mr. Vermicelli. It's so good to speak to you. I don't think the EMTs would have told me she was going to be all right if she wasn't, if you know what I mean. I don't think they're in the habit of giving false hope to people. But I still believe you should go and see her. I'm sure she'd be grateful for a visit from you. You always need your family around in a time of crisis, don't you? I'll be going to the hospital myself, so maybe I'll see you there. I just want to check on her to make sure she's all right. Well, I will go to the hospital as well at once, Rose. Thanks for putting me in the picture. I suspect it is her blood sugar, and if they've got it under control, she should be fine. But I wish she'd be more careful. It's a pleasure, Mr. Vermicelli. I'm sure I will see you at the hospital. What happened? I asked my dad. Apart from a Pekingese dog peeing into your sister's mouth. It's your Aunt Iris. She's collapsed outside her neighbour's house. Honestly, I wish my sister would take better care of herself. She knows she's supposed to monitor her blood sugar levels, but sometimes she's not very good at doing that. I despair of that woman. I need to get to the hospital, son, at once. Can I leave you to man the fort here at Dogwood Manor on your own? Can I trust you to show people around the house? But what am I supposed to do, Dad? I asked. Talk about throwing me in the deep end. Trust me, son. That is the best way for you to learn. Just take down people's details if they're interested in the property. Then take them around the mansion. Try and sell the place to them. If they're interested in making an offer, you can give me a call, and I will show you how to proceed from thenceforth, if need be. I can even speak to them myself on the phone if it'll help. If the Sinclairs turn up, I want you to charm the pants off that woman. She's the one you need to charm. So turn it on, son, like a light switch. Remember, if she shows up, point the bleedingly obvious out, if you have to. Ooh over this and ah over that, about how amazing the fireplaces are, and the high ceilings, that kind of thing. Remember, the key word here, son, is to sell, sell, and sell. What's that supposed to mean, Dad? Sell, 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 I said, shrugging my shoulders. I've never sold a damn thing in my life, Dad. I'd probably struggle to sell candies to kids. My father frowned. That's a defeatist attitude, son, if I ever heard one. It's pretty simple and straightforward. You tell this Mrs. Sinclair how marvellous the layout of Dogwood Manor is. Point out all the good things about the place, and how it cannot be replicated anywhere else. Point out its uniqueness, for goodness sake. Its words like one of a kind, individualistic, prepossessing, that kind of thing. Make her drool like a dog over a bone. It's a little like showing someone a chocolate cake at the bakery. You want a person to buy a piece of that cake. So you proceed to tell that person about how delicious it is, and all the dreamy fillings inside it, to tempt their palate. So now they want to eat it, because it becomes irresistible, don't you see? It's no different to selling houses. You operate on exactly the same principles. You whet the appetite. Do you get my drift, son? But you don't make it blindingly obvious. You need to be subtle. I think I know what you mean, Dad. But this house is not exactly a chocolate cake. There are better examples than that. It's not hard, son. That's all I'm telling you. Please don't look so bemused. Use your imagination, for goodness sake. It's not rocket science, and besides, Dogwood Manor can practically sell itself. Do you think Aunt Iris is going to be all right, Dad? I asked, feeling a rising sense of concern for my aunt, who was such a sweet, gentle soul that reminded me of a doe. She was well loved by my family, and very close to my dad, whom I could see looked very disquieted. I expect he'd had enough scares with his sister over the years, in regards to her blood sugar, that always put him on edge. I hope so, son. You know diabetics. If they don't manage their blood sugar correctly, things can go badly awry. And this is not the first time your Aunt Iris has got herself into a pickle when it comes to her blood sugar. And it won't be the last. When I was a boy, she passed out a lot. She was so bad at monitoring her blood sugar, it would drive my mother mad. She'd scare the teachers at school half to death with her fainting episodes. I'm sure she will be all right, but it would be remiss of me not to check on her. I'll get back here as soon as I can, but you will be on your own for the next couple of hours or so. I could be longer, depending on your aunt's prognosis. Do you think you can manage on your own, son? I'll try my best, Dad, I said, grimacing at the prospect of showing the house on an open day without my father steering me in the right direction, especially a house as grand as this one was. I didn't have the first clue what I was doing. I could only hope no one would turn up for the open day so that I could be relieved of all my responsibilities. But I could not tell my father I was entertaining such treacherous thoughts. But yes, I was silently praying that no one would turn up. But a higher power clearly had a sense of humour, because God simply refused to hear all my prayers. A few people were to show up and turn my day onto its head, in a manner of speaking. My father handed me his silver briefcase, which contained a collection of glossy brochures to give to prospective buyers, and a few other things that I would need for the job on hand. Oh, by the way, he said to me soberly, the O'Reillys have left a fridge full of food and drinks for you, in case you're hungry, so help yourself. I watched my father's Mercedes doing a very impressive three-point turn. He then steadily manoeuvred it down the driveway. His car horn blasted. It was to bid me farewell, and then he drove away, until he was gone and was all but a shadowy, sad little speck on the horizon. I was suddenly conspicuously fully aware that I had been left to my own devices. I was holding the very elegant key in my hand to the manor house. I stood there in front of the house, feeling rather like a goldfish that had been flung haphazardly into a tank of sharks and was waiting to be eaten alive. I could feel the nervous trepidation bubble away in the pit of my stomach, like a pot on the boil. The ancient key that fitted the front door was a very large one, incredibly decorative and detailed, rather like the house itself. Theoretically, you could have worn it around your neck as a dazzling woman's eye-catching pendant, like a piece of stunning jewellery, and I don't doubt people would have fully admired it and asked you where you got it from, not knowing that it was in fact a real front door key. In truth, I'd never beheld such an intricately designed key in all my life. It brought home to me about how even a key in the 1800s was made with an exemplary attention to detail, unlike anything today, when everything is pretty rudimentary and standard-looking, from stereotype mediocre metal keys that we tend to fit into our locks to the light switches in our homes. I projected the key into the lock and the heavy front door swung open rather slowly. It opened out into a large, airy, grand hallway with stunning marble floors, where a grand central staircase made from polished walnut was the focal point of my attention. The detailed carving in the wood was like nothing I'd ever seen before in my life. How long would it have taken to have made a masterful staircase like this, I wondered. It was like an expert piece of artwork in itself. I marvelled at the intricacy of the craftsmanship. The house was resplendently fitted with opulent crystal chandeliers, where the crystal cleverly caught the morning sun that generously spilled through the open windows, sending shafts of pretty rainbow light over the rooms. It was beguiling and eye-catching. I cautiously navigated my way around the grand mansion, that boasted sumptuous furnishings befitting for the 1800s. I began switching on lights and lamps. which is always a matter of routine when selling houses, as lighting is a secret weapon in the arsenal of selling a property. Lighting does wonders for sales. It makes everything look so much better. I dare say Dogwood Manor didn't need much help in that regard, as large family portraits done in rich flamboyant oils hung on the wood-panelled walls. I suspected that the portraits were of the original owner of Dogwood Manor. I understood many of the original pieces of furniture and artworks would be going with the sale of Dogwood Manor, which all made perfect sense to me, for they belonged here as an intrinsic part of the house's great history and should never be dismantled. I almost forgot, as I was so caught up in my revelry, that I was a stand-in estate agent for my father today. It was easy to lose myself behind the sprawling walls of this exquisite mansion, to get lost in some time travel, without any fancy devices at my disposal to take me back. This house, with its opulent indelible hold on the past, did that all for me. In my mind's eye, I could see the family that had lived here all those generations ago, as if their essence had never really gone away, and had clung to the house with a resolute determination, like an old woman hanging on to her memories of the past, refusing to let them fade away into oblivion. I jumped out of my skin when I heard a car door slam, and solid, determined footsteps clambering up towards the front door. Someone was here! I was ill-prepared as to what to say to the stranger. Oh, my God, what was I going to do? I felt a nervous tinge developing deep down inside my gut, and when I heard the loud knock on the door, I nearly fainted. A male voice called out, "Is anybody in? Anybody in?" I don't mind admitting I began to wish the ground would swallow me whole, so that I could disappear and vanish. It was so typical. Had my dad been here at the house with me, there would likely be no fish biting. But now he was gone, there was already a tug on the end of the line, and I was going to have to deal with the stranger all on my own. I could only hope that he bit the bait. But what kind of sales pitch should I adopt? What did I say to the man? I could feel the panic bubbling up over in my chest. My mouth suddenly felt very dry, and for a moment I was completely tongue-tied, as if my tongue had stubbornly stuck itself to the roof of my mouth and was refusing to shift. I wondered if I'd be able to say anything at all to this stranger at this rate. "Hello, how are you?" said the man who was standing in the doorway. He looked at me through a curious gaze. "For a moment, I have to say, I thought no one was there. I'm relieved to see someone is. It was awfully quiet out there with no cars in the driveway. But I did see the sign outside the property, which is just as well, because I very nearly missed it. This place is buried away behind all those woods. It's almost impossible to see it." "It sure is difficult to see," I said, glad to find that I'd actually found my voice. "I'm afraid the owners haven't marked the place terribly well." The man had a warm, friendly smile on his face, and I noticed that there was a black BMW parked in the driveway. He clearly had money, I thought. I couldn't help but notice that he was smartly attired, wearing a navy blue jacket with gold buttons and white chinos. He was wearing a cravat neatly tucked into a white crisp cotton shirt. I noticed he had a couple of sideburns. He obviously was quite old-fashioned in every regard, so he was the perfect candidate, I thought, to buy Dogwood Manor. I wondered if he had a wife and children, but I didn't feel it was appropriate to ask that question. Maybe things were looking up after all, and this man looked human enough, so he wouldn't bite. I could do this, I thought, feeling a blast of unlikely confidence rush right through me like a fast-moving wind. The man stretched out his hand to shake mine. He had a firm handshake, which my dad would always say was a very good sign. "Nothing worse than a limp, sweaty handshake, son," he would tell me. "The name's Lewis Brown," he said. "I'm here to look around Dogwood Manor. You must be Lawrence Vermicelli." "No, that's my dad," I said. "I'm filling in for him today. My name is Parker Vermicelli." "Pleased to meet you, Parker. It's a pleasure. Do you mind if I have a look around this glorious mansion? I won't take a moment. This place is splendid. Do you know when exactly it was built?" "When was it built?" I said, repeating his question. I couldn't remember. I didn't want to sound like a complete imbecile about a house that I was supposed to be showing to this man. The 1800s, I said rather lamely, to which the man nodded politely. I knew he had wanted me to be more pacific, but I had forgotten the date my father had mentioned to me. "I'm just going to show myself around the place, if you don't mind. I prefer to look at it on my own, to get a feel for it, without any interruption. But of course, sir," I said, giving the man a bright sunny smile, "be my guest. As you say, it's a beautiful home. You will not be disappointed. It's got, you know, lovely fireplaces, and the drawing room is great." My God, this was so embarrassing. I was beginning to sound like a second-hand car salesman, trying to shift an old Toyota Corolla onto someone. It was pathetic. If the man thought these things about me, he said nothing. He was a perfect gentleman. He nodded his head politely and began to take himself around the mansion, as if he knew exactly where he was going. I didn't want to go running around after him, did I? I didn't want to say, "Oh, look at the chandelier, sir. Oh, my God, isn't it beautiful? Look at the crystal, the way the rainbows dance around the room." That would seem so tacky. But I didn't have the first clue on how to sell a house, let alone anything else for that matter. I restrained myself from being overly enthusiastic about the property, even though I genuinely thought Dogwood Manor was a treasure. Such ebullient overtures on my part, from someone as demure as myself, might come across as fake and insincere. I would rather just sit back and let the man come to me if he had any questions, and I privately hoped that he did not, as I'm not sure I would know the answers to the kind of questions this very clued-up man might actually ask me. I remained seated in the drawing-room, at the worn-out desk, pretending to look incredibly busy on my mobile phone, when I was anything but. I could hear the man thumping away through the rooms, sometimes pausing for a brief moment, as if taking a long hard look at something. I then heard Mr. Brown reluctantly traipsing down the steps of the long, sweeping, ornate staircase, and that was when it occurred to me that I hadn't given him one of the glossy brochures I was expected to give all potential buyers. "So what do you think, sir?" I asked Mr. Brown, as he walked from the hallway towards me, with a huge, satisfied grin on his face. My heart began to jump excitedly in my chest, as if hundreds of crickets were doing leapfrogs inside me. Oh, my God! He was going to put in an offer for Dogwood Manor. I could feel it in my bones. My face eagerly burst into a gormless grin. It made me look absolutely ridiculous. And then I said rather inappropriately, "Don't tell me, Mr. Brown. You've fallen in love with Dogwood Manor, haven't you? You're going to be putting an offer in." The words had just rolled off my tongue like two marbles, and I had no way of stopping them. Mr. Brown held up his hand, as if to slow down my impetuous enthusiasm. "The place is absolutely perfect," he admitted. "And yes, I'm in love with it. But there is only one unfortunate snag, I'm afraid." I found myself grinning at him from ear to ear. In truth, I must have looked like a real simpleton. Did this mean that I was going to get a sale, I wondered? What would my father think about that? That the first person that had seen the house had bitten the bait? Maybe I had the makings of a great real estate agent after all. If houses were this easy to shift, before long I'd be swinging from the chandeliers in glee. I envisaged phoning my dad at the hospital and saying, "Guess what, Dad? You're not going to believe it. I've had a buyer for Dogwood Manor, and an offer is on the table." I could imagine my father's reaction. How pleased he would be. Such good news, he'd think. And the thought of telling him about my dazzling successes made me feel immeasurably proud. "Oh, of course," I said. "You're probably worried about the plumbing or the electricity. You need not worry, Mr. Brown. The house has been fully refurbished from top to bottom, I'm glad to tell you. Somewhere in my father's briefcase I've got a surveyor's appraisal for the property. Of course, there's nothing to stop you having your own evaluation on the place. Would you like to look at the report? In the appraisal it will tell you what a sound investment Dogwood Manor is, and that everything is in perfect working order." Before Mr. Brown could actually have time to answer me, I had promptly thrust the bemused man a glossy brochure. He glanced down at the price and let out a loud whistle, followed by a beleaguered groan, the sound you tend to make when you realize you have to pay bills that you can ill afford to pay. I had made that familiar noise often enough, when my finances had got so grim that I could barely afford to pay my bills, so I could predict what was coming next, and it turned out I was not wrong. I remember feeling as if I had found a piece of gold bullion, only to discover it was a plastic nugget after all, with no real value at all. You know the sort of sinking feeling you get when everything goes downhill very fast. "I suppose we can all dream, can't we?" said Mr. Brown. "I knew this place was well out of my price range, but I couldn't resist taking a look at the place while it was on the market. I might not get a second chance. Dogwood Manor was quite the place in its heyday, you know. It was owned by some very well-to-do people, who would host parties on the veranda and invite people to dances. When I heard the place had been restored to its original condition, I had to take a look. But I'm afraid I could never buy a place as lovely as this, unless I won the lottery. But son, if I do happen to hit the jackpot tonight, I will be here first thing in the morning to put in an offer, and you have my word on that. I would not let a place like this slip through my fingers if I had the dosh. But I'm afraid these days I'm living on debt. You know what it's like. Even my BMW is owned by the bank. More's the pity." I gave the man a weak smile. How could I have got it so terribly wrong? My father had warned me not to be duped by appearances. I had assumed by Mr. Brown's smart demeanour and by the black BMW stoically parked in our driveway that this was a man of means who could easily buy a house like this. Lesson number 1 was appearances could be remarkably deceptive. Just because someone looks as if they've got bank vaults at home full of gold bullion doesn't mean they actually do. "Well, I'm very glad you like Dogwood Manor, Mr. Brown, and I do hope for you that you happen to win the lottery tomorrow. But I'm sorry that you've missed out on the place." I gave him a withering glance, feeling as deflated as a flower that has spent over a week in a vase, and has long since passed its best. "Not as sorry as I am, son, but it's very good to have met you." Mr. Brown sashayed to his black BMW, looking every bit the perfect gentleman, the kind of man I would have put money on buying Dogwood Manor. I clearly was not cut out to be a betting man. My heart dropped in my chest like a heavy stone being flung into a large body of water. It would have been good to have made a sale on the first day of standing in for my father, but by the looks of things that was not going to happen. After the first interested customer of the day, I realized my father's job as a real estate agent selling houses for a living was not as plain sailing as I thought it would be. I was to learn you could land yourself into choppy waters and get things so horribly wrong in your assessment of people, and I gleaned this after the first customer of the day. I was learning fast. For a long while I waited patiently in the drawing room for any prospective buyers to come to Dogwood Manor. Then I went and made myself a sandwich in the kitchen and knocked back a couple of cold drinks. No buyers came, much to my relief, until a very old-looking Volkswagen Golf that looked good enough to be used for scrap metal came rolling down the driveway rather precariously. The whole car rattled, clanked and groaned as it came to a thunderous halt. It seemed to almost crash land in the driveway, making a mighty popping sound, as if it had broken down. To my horror, a pillar of ugly, thick black smoke rose up from the engine into the sky. The tired old car was battered and worn out. It really did look like it was standing on its last legs. I needed this like a hole in the head. I winced as I wondered whether the driver would get this unsightly thing started up again, for this dilapidated wreck of a car looked like a nasty blight on the landscape that needed to be blotted out as quickly as possible, as it robbed Dogwood Manor of any curb appeal and could potentially drive away any prospective buyers. I decided the stranger in the car that I believed was a woman must have come to the wrong address. That would be it, I thought. It was easy to lose your way in these parts, to get horribly, horribly lost. There was no way she could be a potential buyer. That would be impossible. Not when she was driving a car like that. Maybe she needed directions, but then again I wasn't best equipped to give her those. This place was tucked away in the middle of nowhere, and regretfully I had not paid close attention to the route my father had taken when he brought me here. I observed an oversized woman with 3 chins that buried her face beneath its undulating folds, climbing out of the car. She had what looked like tomato ketchup stains spilled down the front of her sweatshirt, with a logo on it in gold which read, "Big is the new beautiful." The woman came trudging very proudly up to the front door, waddling like a goose, with 2 bashful-looking shy kids trailing at her side, like 2 well-tethered little dogs. One of the kids was a skinny little girl, and then there was a thin little boy, who could have been no more than 6 or 7 years old. The children were both eagerly sucking bright red lollipops, the size of the palm of your hand. Their fingers were very sticky. I was terrified they might touch the staircase and the doors with their filthy fingers. With the house being so pristine, I was quite certain that the O'Reillys would not be remotely happy to have grubby goo spread over their renovated home. But what could I do? It was not my place to say anything. The oversized woman seemed a little out of breath when she entered the hallway. There were beads of perspiration that had broken out on her forehead, that she hurriedly dabbed away with the back of her tissue. "Oh dear," she muttered. "It's so hot, so dreadfully hot today." She looked at me through narrowing eyes that seemed so small and inconspicuous on her wide face, like 2 tiny buttons sewn onto a vast expanse of beige fabric. "Are you the estate agent?" she asked suspiciously, looking around almost as if she half expected to see someone older than myself making their appearance known and taking over from me. But she was to be sadly disappointed about that. "That's right," I said. "I'm presenting the house today. The name is Parker Vermicelli. I'm delighted to meet you, ma'am. I take it you're interested in seeing around Dogwood Manor. Would you like a brochure that will give you all the details about the property?" "Of course I want a brochure," said the woman, greedily snatching it away from my hand and giving me a slightly disapproving, affronted look. She studied the house on the spread-out page. "Ah, it's big, isn't it? Just the way I like it." The woman gave me a cursory glance. "You don't look old enough to be an estate agent, if you don't mind my saying so," she said rather brusquely. "How old are you?" I took offence to the question. I may be a teenager, but this did not mean I was incompetent to do this job. "I'm not an estate agent, ma'am," I admitted. "I told you I'm standing in for my father. I'm 18. My dad is showing me the ropes in the business, so I'm learning about it at the moment." "Well, he shouldn't leave you on your own like this, should he? What kind of a father is he? You look younger than your 18 years, said the woman. "It's a pity that I cannot be shown around by a seasoned professional, but I guess you'll just have to do." "But of course," I said, giving the woman a watery smile. "I would be delighted, ma'am, to show you around this house. Sorry I didn't get your name." "The name is Barbara Tooley, if you must know, but everybody I know calls me Dolly." "Are you looking for yourself?" I asked. The woman let out a cocky laugh. "Heavens, no, son. Do I look as if I can afford a place like this?" she asked me, rolling her eyes in the back of her head. "You're not very sharp, young man, if you don't mind my saying so. You only have to look at my clapped-out motor car parked in the driveway to know I ain't got money stashed away in the bank. If I did, I wouldn't be driving such a beat-up old thing like that. I'll be lucky if I can get that clapper to start again when I finally leave this place. Sadly, it's on its last legs, I'm afraid. If you must know, I'm looking for my sister, She's filthy rich, landed herself a great big catch on Wall Street, and got a ring on her finger so fast before that husband of hers woke up to smell the coffee. That sister of mine knows what side her bread's buttered, believe me. She's always fancied the finer things in life. Did so even when she was a kid. Had aspirations for making it big, and she did so. And I say good on her. I'm looking at this place on my sister's behalf. I was in the area, and I thought, why not? I told her I'd give her a report on Dogwood Manor. She couldn't come here herself today, regrettably. She had a prior engagement. My sister simply adores historic homes. This place looks a lot like, what is it called now? The woman paused for a brief moment. It was on a British television programme that was aired in America. Everybody loved it. My sister particularly, because of course she loves history. She also loved the programme because it had her favourite actress starring in it. What was her name again? Oh yes, Maggie Smith. What was that place called now? I've gone completely blank. Oh, you're talking about Downton Abbey, ma'am, I said. Ah, yes, that is my sister for you. She fancies herself in a grand house like the Crawleys lived in back in the day. So this place, Dogwood Manor, ticks all the boxes for her. She can play being lady of the manor in a house like this, can't she? And she would simply adore to do that. My sister's a posh bird, quite a poser, really. Even paid for the two of us to have elocution lessons, would you believe? To improve our vocabulary, as she believes that how you speak is incredibly important. But personally I haven't found speaking posh has got me terribly far. But for my sister, doors have opened up for her wherever she goes. I suppose it's never really harmed my sister, being so incredibly attractive, and being a size 0 to boot, dressing like the late Jackie Kennedy used to. That's my sister for you. One look at her and you will think she owns an ocean liner and takes her holidays in Monaco. Regretfully, the same cannot be said for myself. But I'm not going to make any apologies in that regard. I've always had a shoddy metabolism, I'm afraid. I only have to look at a donut and I put on 3 dress sizes almost immediately. I'm sure that's not true, ma'am, I said politely. It is true, I'm afraid, young man. You don't have to lie to be nice, you know. The mirror never lies, and I haven't dared look in one for many years. Otherwise I would get a terrible fright, wondering who the hippo was that was staring back at me in the mirror. Hearing Dolly speak made me happy indeed. This was very good news. Things were looking up. My heart began to flutter with excitement. Dolly may look like she lived in a clapped-out car with her 2 kids, but by the sounds of things her sister was absolutely minted, and rather fancied herself as lady of the manor. There may be a sail in the wings after all, so I needed to do my level best to treat Dolly like a film star, even if she was far from looking like one, so that she could give her sister a good report on Dogwood Manor. I took Dolly around the grand mansion, with my chest proudly puffed up like a penguin, for I felt certain an imminent sale was brewing. Now you kids, said Dolly, pointing a warning sausage-sized finger at her 2 children, who stared back at her with wide brown eyes. I need you to both behave. You need to both stay close to me. Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't want you going wandering off on your own. Dolly fixed her gaze particularly on the little girl, as if her youngest daughter was a problematic child that needed careful watching over. Tansy, Mummy needs you to behave yourself, and if you're a good girl, I'll buy you an ice cream later. I have to concentrate, so no funny business while I'm looking around this lovely house for your aunt. Do you understand? Tom, make absolutely sure you watch your sister's every move. Don't let her wander off too far away from where I am. I want no running off or playing hide-and-seek in the closets. Do you understand? And don't touch anything too valuable. We promise to be good, Mummy, said the little boy, speaking for the both of them. Dolly's two children seemed to obediently follow close behind their mother, as they had promised they would do so. They appeared to spend much of their time whispering and giggling together. Occasionally they'd look out of the windows of Dogwood Manor to enjoy the views, all the while sucking their sticky lollipops and getting goo and dirty handprints all over the place. I didn't care, not if a sale was on the horizon. I knew after they were gone, I'd have to find a warm cloth somewhere in the kitchen and wipe up the sticky mess after them, which seemed like a small price to pay if Dolly's sister considered buying Dogwood Manor. Things were looking up, especially when Dolly oohed and ahed with appreciation with everything she viewed. It would seem that every approving grunt she made my heart beat a little faster, as I eagerly anticipated a great big fat juicy sale on the cards. Dolly was out of breath when she climbed the staircase. She huffed and puffed all the way up. "This place is absolutely magnificent. I think Lisa would love this home. I can actually see her living here. One thing is she'll keep her figure in check, running up and down these flights of stairs. She won't need a gym membership at all, will she?" "You're right," I said. "You would get fit running up and down the staircase every day. I'm most sure about that." "I wouldn't like it myself," said Dolly, "but this house ticks all the boxes for my sister. No one can deny that." At Dolly's comments, I inwardly grinned. If I procured a sale, I wondered whether my father would give me some of the commission. It would only be fair, wouldn't it, if I was the one that shifted the house for him? I was now resolutely determined to sell this place before my father arrived back on the scene from the hospital. I was now hoping he would take his time getting back to Dogwood Manor, so that I might procure that much-needed sale before he even got back. "And this is the master bedroom," I said to Dolly proudly. I led her into the stunning room with its grand, ornately carved four-poster bed, accentuated by the deep rich colour of the emerald green bed covers. The room boasted a grand fireplace and beautiful large windows overlooking the front yard. "Lovely jubbly," said Dolly, running her hands approvingly over the wooden bed. I'd never heard an American woman use such expressions before, so it really was quite strange to hear. Maybe she watched a ton of British sitcoms and was adopting their phraseology into her American drawl. It was quite refreshing in a manner of speaking. All of a sudden the little boy ran up to his mother and began pulling at her sweater earnestly, his lollipop sticking abrasively to her big-as-beautiful sweatshirt. "Tom, what is your problem, love? You're supposed to be playing close by me with your sister and keeping a firm eye on little Tansy. You know how mischievous your sister can be. I told you I need to look around this property for Aunt Lisa. I can't have you interfering." Dolly removed the sticky lollipop from her sweatshirt with an expression of abject disgust on her face. "Look what you've done to my sweater. It's very sticky now," she said, handing the lollipop back to her son. "Where is Tansy?" she asked, her eyes sweeping across the room for her little girl, who did not appear to be there. Tom's eyes grew round. For a moment he looked like a deer caught in headlights. He appeared to be quite affrighted. "Tansy's gone, Mummy! She's gone!" he wailed, tears spilling down his cheeks unapologetically. Dolly frowned at her son. "What are you talking about, Tom? What do you mean Tansy's gone?" "Tansy went into the woods to play with the bear lady. I saw her, Mummy." "What do you mean she went into the woods, Tom? You know you're supposed to look after your sister. I thought I told you to stick by me at all times and not to wander off. I haven't got eyes in the back of my head, you know," said Dolly scoldingly. "I can't be looking at a house and watching you at the very same time, can I?" "But she wouldn't listen, Mummy. I told her not to go. We saw the bear lady in the upstairs window. Tansy ran downstairs and out of the house to see her. I told her to stop, but she wouldn't listen. She ignored me, Mummy. I think she went to play with the bear lady, but what if the bear lady is a very horrible lady? What if the bear lady hurts her? The bear lady is very, very big, Mummy." are you saying, Tom? I do wish you would speak more clearly. You say that Tansy saw a bear in the woods and went running after it. Is that what you're saying?" said Dolly in abject horror. She broke out into beads of perspiration all over her blubbery face. She began to wobble precariously, like a great big Portuguese man of war. She started to pant furiously like a dog who's been running around and around for many miles and has exhausted himself to such an extreme that all he wants to do is to flop onto the ground with his tongue hanging out as he tries to adjust to his breathing. I sneakily suspected that poor Dolly was having some kind of a panic attack, and I had no idea in the circumstances how to offer her help or support in regards to the matter. "What on earth is wrong with you, Tom? Why won't you listen? You were supposed to look after Tansy." "But you didn't," said Dolly breathlessly. "You know what my daughter is like. What if the bear attacks her? Have you thought about that, Tom? How many times have I told you kids that bears in the wild are not like the soft, fluffy, cute bears you buy at the store? They are wild animals. They are dangerous. You can't just go and play with them. What on earth is wrong with you? You should have known better, Tom. You're the oldest. I expect better from you, Tom. Really I do." Dolly let out an exasperated sigh. She shook her head furiously. "I knew I should never have brought you two kids along for the ride. Nothing but trouble. I told you to stay by my side, but would you listen? No, you wouldn't. I even bought those lollipops to keep you both occupied. But no, you couldn't be good, could you? You've let your sister go wandering off into the woods, running after a female bear. You know that is asking for trouble, son. Honestly, I despair with the two of you. Even when I teach the both of you common sense, you willfully abandon it." Dolly was now wheezing, struggling desperately to breathe in her angst. She pointed a large sausage-sized finger at me, thrusting her ample derriere onto the bed, so that the whole bed rocked under her sizable girth as she bounced on the mattress. She clutched her purse tightly to her chest, as if holding it gave her some much-needed energy. She tried to focus on her breathing, so she could speak more clearly without running out of breath. She ferreted around in her purse, and finally found the inhaler she was looking for, which she used to help her unblock her airways. I doubt the woman suffered from asthma, but it seemed to help her breathe more easily. "You!" she said, pointing at me presumptuously, as if I was somehow responsible for her daughter Tansy having wandered off. "You need to go after Tansy for me, son. She's in the woods. She's going after a bear. That thing could potentially kill her. I can't do it myself. I simply haven't got the energy. I'm completely out of breath. I know I should get fit and lose weight, but I've got a dilapidated metabolism. The doctor's tried everything for me, but I'm as clapped out and as tired as the car that is parked in my driveway is, I'm afraid." Dolly was still gasping for breath. Indeed, it would seem she was unable to move a muscle, as like a great big walrus squatting lackadaisically on the beach, she parked herself on the bed, with an expectation directed towards me, written over her face, as if she was completely dependent on me to go after her daughter Tansy and bring her back safely into the fold, like a sheep that has gone astray. In effect, I needed to be the shepherd, looking for the lost sheep. "Don't worry about a thing, Dolly, and please don't panic. I need you to calm down. Your breathing is very worrying. I'll get your daughter Tansy back for you, I can promise you of that. I'm sure she hasn't gone terribly far." Dolly groaned. "You don't know what my Tansy's like, young man. You have absolutely no idea. She's always wandering off and doing her own thing. Tom has to watch her all the time like a hawk. She gets up to so much mischief. Even when we go to the supermarket, she wanders off like this. Last time I went to the supermarket, they found her in the seafood section, trying to befriend a live lobster. She pulled the thing out of the tank, removed the string from its pincers, and she set the thing free on the supermarket floor where it was flapping around. I'd never been so embarrassed in all my life. But that's my Tansy for you. She's a law unto herself. So I bought the supermarket lobster home, and it's now living in a tank we set up for him. She's called the thing Ernie. Ernie, I believe it is. How could I not buy the thing after all that?" Where exactly did she go, Tom? I asked the young boy, who ran to the window in the bedroom and pointed to a path through the trees. She went in there after the bear lady. I need you to stay on this bed and focus on your breathing, Dolly, I told the woman. I've got this sorted. Some of those black bears are scared of human beings. I saw some bear spray in the kitchen. I'll take it along with me, but I'm sure I shall scare it away. Have no fear. Everything's going to be just fine. Go at once, said Dolly. We can't just spend our time pontificating and talking about this. We need to go out there and get my tansy. Please, I'm begging you, go now. Think about it, it's spring. The bears have come out of hibernation, have they not? Imagine if this bear has got cubs. Dolly began to whimper at the thought of her daughter having a confrontation with a black bear with cubs. Can I go with him, Mummy, to look for tansy? Asked little Tom. I promise I'll be good. I'll behave myself. No, you can't, said Dolly. You stay here with me, Tom. I've had enough trouble for one day, and I don't want any more funny business. You don't realize how serious this is, Tom. Your sister could be in big trouble if she meets a mother bear. I can't bear to think about it. What was she thinking running after it like that? I told you, Mummy, it wasn't a black bear with cubs. It was a bear lady. Oh, stop talking nonsense, Tom. Honestly, you don't know if the bear has got cubs or not. She would probably keep the cubs very discreetly hidden. Now, goodness gracious me, let this man go after Tansy. I wasted no time in bolting towards the woodgrove, conveniently forgetting that I was wearing a smart suit and shiny polished shoes. I probably looked ridiculous traipsing in the wood, looking for a little girl, but I had very little concern for myself. I took the path through the trees that Tom had pointed out to me. I brushed past some thorny briars that tore into my suit, ripping up the fabric on the shoulder area. I had some bear spray in my jacket, and I was disquieted about the thought of a little girl running after a bear. Hopefully the black bear would have bolted away by now. They could be timid at times, but what if it was a mother with cubs? It was spring, and the mother could have come out of hibernation. I did know there were bear sightings in these parts all the time. I didn't want to think about that. I needed to find little Tansy as quickly as possible, and by the sounds of things, she was always getting into horrible scrapes. I could empathise with Dolly, as growing up I had been a difficult child myself, that had tested my parents' patience to no end. It was a beautiful day. The cheerful spring sun graciously spilled through the branches of the trees in a glittering glaze that seemed to sparkle like glitter over the curtains of pretty green foliage and abundant shrubbery growing beneath the shaded canopy of the trees. The earthen floor was richly dark and fertile, and fallen leaves from the previous fall still covered the ground in a rich earthen mulch. The woodgrove was filled with the pleasing chirping sound of the birds, and the woody undertones and sweet flowery fragrances that impregnated the air were pleasing to behold. Bluebells resplendently covered the ground in flowery carpets. I wondered if I should call out Tansy's name, but before I could make that decision, all of a sudden I heard some chuckling and a little girl's voice saying, "Go, go, go!" What the hell, I thought, heartily relieved to hear that little Tansy sounded enthused and very upbeat. She didn't appear to be a frightened girl at all. On the contrary, I got the impression she appeared to be having a whale of a time, which brought me immediate relief. The girl was clearly not in trouble. I heard a strange thumbling sound through the trees, followed by a chatter, and that was followed by further giggles from Tansy. My curiosity was piqued. What was the little girl doing, I wondered? I decided to proceed cautiously on my feet. I knew growing up my sister Kate would spend countless hours talking to her dolls. I wondered if Tansy was caught up in a similar imaginary world. I wouldn't be remotely surprised. I moved towards the sound of little Tansy, and what I saw took my breath away. I saw Tansy's lollipop lying on the ground, covered in soil. The girl had abandoned it for something way better, and significantly more entertaining. That was when I saw this tall, towering silhouette, that looked rather shadowy in the gossamer light of the woods. I stood very still and tried to focus on what I was seeing. I tried to persuade myself that this was not a trick of the light, but I realized what I was seeing was very definitely real. I was so taken aback that for a moment I became dizzy and disorientated, as if the shock of what I was beholding had knocked the wind out of my sails. I suddenly became rather faint and light-headed. I managed to compose myself. I steadied myself by reaching out for the tree trunk and holding myself erect. I allowed the fight and flight response to pass right through me, while I remained as still as a footprint stuck in cement. I realized that Tansy was sitting on top of the shoulders of what I could only describe as the largest female Bigfoot I've ever seen, not that I've ever seen a Bigfoot before, who was running up and down the clearing in the woods with a little girl perched on her shoulders. The female Bigfoot was giving the delighted girl rides. I had no idea how to react to this strange kind of scenario, for I had never ever seen anything like this happening before, and little Tansy appeared to be having the time of her life. She was slapping the Bigfoot's ponderous shoulders with her hands, as if they were the reins of a horse that she was directing, and she was shouting, "Giddy up! Giddy up, horsey! Giddy up! Go, go, go!" The Bigfoot seemed to be enjoying herself as much as the child was. I could even swear that the creature was chuckling. The Bigfoot was easily 8 foot tall, with shoulders that were so large and long dark flowing hair. But the face of this creature was remarkably human, so much so it took my breath away. Until this point in my life, I had never ever given the cryptid creatures a passing thought, but now I knew they were real. I was absolutely certain the Bigfoot and little Tansy were so caught up in the moment that they were not aware that I was there. But then I made a catastrophic mistake by stepping on a twig. It snapped so loudly that the Bigfoot immediately stopped in her tracks. She turned around to look at the place where I was hiding. She had heard me crunch a twig and knew where to locate me. I was amazed at her pinpoint accuracy. I remember once that a cricket got into my bedroom at home, and although it was so close and so loud, I could never locate it. The Bigfoot, with little Tansy perched on her back, came thundering towards me. She eagerly pushed back a curtain of shrubbery and saw me cowering behind the tree, looking straight at her through affrighted eyes. I don't mind admitting that I was terrified. I had no idea how she'd react to me. Children were one thing, adults quite another. It's not every day that you are standing inches away from a powerful creature, giving you a penetrating gaze. I was so close to her, I could actually feel her breath on my face, and it actually smelt oddly of onions, which was rather bizarre in itself. At this point my heart was booming in my chest at 1,000 miles an hour, and all I wanted to do was to shoot out of the woodgrove as fast as I could. The Bigfoot's eyes were remarkably kind, and when her eyes met mine, I knew at once she meant me no harm, that she was a benevolent creature. It was like she knew exactly why I'd come here. She put the little girl onto the ground, pushing her gently towards me, saying something to Tansy in a strange language, which the girl appeared to understand. "Kitakwi, motolasina sa, hikasi la po." Little Tansy looked angry. She stamped her little feet indignantly and said, "I want to stay with you and play horsey. I don't want to go with him. I don't know him. I don't want to go with him." The Bigfoot spoke to her again, in a stern tone of voice, and said, "Kutolo, kasi, motalola." She glanced at me with apologetic eyes, as if to apologize profusely for the child's belligerence. "You need to come with me," I said to Tansy, suddenly finding my voice, and taking the girl's hands in mine. I think the Bigfoot saw this as her quintessential opportunity to quickly escape. As I secretly suspect, she knew very well that Tansy was quite the demanding child. She nodded at little Tansy and said something encouraging to the girl. I'm not sure what it was, but I suspect it was goodbye. "Kila takila, motolo shikasa." And then she just glided away. Little Tansy had another tantrum. She began to cry. I had no idea how to treat little children, but I said to her in a no-nonsense tone of voice, which made Tansy promptly pay attention to me, "Stop this now, Tansy. You're coming with me." She stopped crying at once, wiping the tears away from her eyes. She looked at me sorrowfully. "I only wanted to play with the bear lady. I just wanted to play with her." "Tansy, you need to come with me. You can't play with the bear lady. The bear lady's got other things to do. Your mother's back at the house and beside herself with worry. She told you to stay by her side, but you wandered off. She's very angry with you." Little Tansy followed me meekly through the woods, looking incredibly sorry for herself, as if I was dragging her away from a playground and bringing her home to eat liver and onions. When I arrived back at Dogwood Manor and was walking up the driveway, Dolly had managed to prise herself off the bed upstairs. She had clearly wobbled down the staircase and finally was seated in her dog-eared car that looked as worn out and jaded as she did. I wondered if she would get the thing started at all. She was sitting in the front seat, heaving as she tried to breathe. She was so incredibly large that she took up the entire seat. When she saw me bringing Tansy back to the car, all of her 3 chins wobbled in appreciation, and I saw tears of relief gather into her eyes like condensation on a window. I felt so sorry for her. "Oh, bless you, young man," she said, mopping the perspiration off her brow with her tissue. "Thank you so much, Parker," she said. "See, I told you, Dolly. I told you that your daughter would be all right," I said with a big grin on my face. "No harm done. Your daughter is as right as rain, is she not?" Dolly waved a warning finger at her daughter. "You don't ever do something like that again. Do you understand, young lady? If you ever do that again, you'll be in such trouble. When I tell you to stay with me and your brother, that's what I expect from you." "I just wanted to play with the bear lady, Mummy. She gave me a ride on her shoulders." "You do not, and I repeat, do not go chasing after bears, young lady. You understand? Bears are dangerous creatures. How many times have I told you that?" "But the bear lady is nice, Mummy." "Sweetheart, listen to yourself. You're talking nonsense. Bears may appear nice on the surface. They may look cuddly, like they do in a toy store. But they're dangerous, and you need to stay away from them. Do you understand that?" "But, Mummy—" "Don't talk back to me, little girl. Do you understand, Tansy? Now get into the car. I've had quite enough of your nonsense for one day. You've worn me to a frazzle. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. If something had happened to you, I'd never forgive myself. I knew I couldn't trust you to bring you along today. You're always getting into so much mischief. I despair of you. I really do." Little Tansy obediently got into the back of the car, where she sat next to her brother Tom. The two began to whisper and giggle together. I cleared my throat. "Sorry, Mrs." "You don't need to call me Mrs. Parker. It's Dolly. Dolly, are you going to tell your sister, Lisa, about Dogwood Manor?" I asked her. "You said she might be interested in the place. As you can see, it's a very desirable property, packed with a very rich history, and for the right buyer it would be very desirable." "I'm not going to tell her about this place, Parker. Those there woods are a very big problem for me, you see," said Dolly, pointing her fat finger at the woods. "I don't want my daughter coming to stay at this place with her aunt and getting up to all kinds of mischief. If there are bears around, it poses a very big problem. I can't possibly spend my life dragging Tansy away from those woods. And if she came to stay here with her Aunt Lisa, she'd be in those woods day and night. I can't possibly let that happen. I will tell my sister that Dogwood Manor is not suitable. I'm sorry about that, son, really I am. But I've got my children to consider. They like to spend time with their Aunt Lisa, and I can't have them coming here under any circumstances. I'd probably have a heart attack worrying about them all the time." My heart sank as Dolly started up the engine of her worn-out car. Black smoke pirouetted into the air, and with an almighty thunderous chug, the engine started The car seemed to roll magically into life, as if it had been a dead cadaver that had been resuscitated from certain death. Dolly wound down her window to say thank you to me. "Thank you, Parker, for retrieving Tansy from the grove. I'm so dreadfully grateful for your help." "It's no problem at all, Dolly," I said. Dolly lifted up a podgy hand to wave farewell to me. Her battered car rather precariously sashayed down the driveway until it was all but gone and was a speck on the horizon. I suppose I should have been heartily relieved that the thing had not broken down. I stood there feeling somewhat bemused about what had transpired only moments before. I had seen a Bigfoot giving little Tansy rides on its ponderous shoulders, and Tansy had called the Bigfoot the Bear Lady. It was hard to get my head around this fact. I really thought coming here today would be a non-starter for me, and it would turn out to be a pretty routine, predictable day, but it had been anything but. I had agreed to come here to appease my father, who had become increasingly frustrated that his son did not know what he wanted to do with his life. I had been thinking of taking a gap year off before I finally went to college. I knew it was better to sit on some bright ideas for a career, rather than to go blindly hurtling into something that I might later regret. My father intrinsically believed that if I spent some time with him, selling real estate, I might find something that I would enjoy doing with my life. My mother had promptly laid on the pressure, so I had decided to humour them both by coming along today. The day had panned out to be like nothing I'd ever expected, and in a strange way I was rather glad my father had been called away to the hospital, so that I could meet this female Bigfoot. Had that not happened, I might not have encountered her. I decided to keep the matter of the encounter to myself. This was not something I'd be willing to share with anyone. Besides, if I was to recount my strange tale, would anyone actually believe me? Somehow I doubted it. It was highly unlikely, and the last thing I wanted to do was to be the butt of anybody's jokes. It must have been minutes later that a Bentley rolled down the driveway. I knew that whoever was in the fancy car had to be a serious buyer. At the time I had no idea what a sight for sore eyes I was. I had ripped the jacket on my suit, as it had got entangled by some thorny barbs during my abrupt run through the woods, and my shiny shoes were now covered in dust. The Bentley parked outside Dogwood Manor. The engine purred so gently as the car finally came to an abrupt stop. It was quite a contrast from the noisy car Dolly had left the property in only moments before. I stood outside the front door of Dogwood Manor, waiting for the couple in the car to make their appearance. The woman climbed out of the Bentley slowly, but she did so with so much grace, like that of a gazelle, her brown, curious eyes fixed on Dogwood Manor. It was almost as if the woman was in an art gallery, and her attention was fixated on one of the great works of art. I don't think she appeared to notice me. She was so caught up in her own world. The woman was wearing a zooty pair of Calvin Klein sunglasses. She was in her 40s. She had long, dark brown hair tied away from her face in a ponytail. She was wearing some navy blue chinos, red pumps, a red thin belt, and a black, white and red pinstripe shirt. Moments later her husband soon climbed out of the driver's side door. He looked smart casual, extremely well presented. He was a tall man, although I doubt he was more than 6 foot, while his wife, by contrast, was much more petite. They both stood staring at the house together, and for a brief moment exchanged some inaudible words, which involved much head nodding. I could tell at once they were enchanted by Dogwood Manor. The woman began to sashay rather eagerly towards the front door. She swung her narrow hips backwards and forwards, moving with a purposeful, presumptuous but very graceful gait, almost as if she really was the new owner of Dogwood Manor. She appeared to have no reticence in her attitude, but wore an expression of expectation on her face that could only come from someone that was keen to buy a property like this. She looked every part the quintessential lady of the manor, and deep down inside my gut, somehow I knew unequivocally that she would be wearing that title in due course. She seemed to fit in this setting like the dogwoods and daffodils belonged to spring. That was when she appeared to notice me for the very first time. Her eyes swiveled around to meet mine, and then her gaze dropped down to study my bedraggled-looking suit that had been subjected to an unfortunate run-in with some thorny barbs. That was when I realized what a sorry sight I looked, but it was too late to do anything about it now, to redeem the situation. It would have been a lot better if I'd removed the jacket I'd been wearing. Damn, I thought, when I considered my father's long drawn-out lectures about appearances being absolutely everything in real estate. What kind of curb appeal did I bring to this grandiose mansion, when I looked as if I'd been having a love affair with a thorn bush? "Hello there," she called out, marching towards me. "Me and my husband are here for your open day. We saw the sign outside on the road. Goodness gracious me, I'm so glad I saw it. We so nearly missed it. But thankfully I noticed the balloons blowing around in the wind rather wildly. This place is in the middle of nowhere, isn't it? Like a best-kept secret that no one is allowed to know about. I can see why this place is an absolute treasure. If I lived here, I'd also want to hide it away. It ticks all my boxes. This is the house I've been looking for all my life, and I can't believe that I found it today. Me and my husband, you know, we live in old Louisville, in an old, recently renovated Victorian. I never wanted to move or live anywhere else, until now. This house is actually giving me heart palpitations, in a good way, of course. I think I've fallen in love already. We have to look at this place. I hope you don't mind if we scoot around it and have a good look." "Well, of course you can. Welcome to Dogwood Manor," I said in a professional, rather clipped tone of voice. "Be my guest. You can look around the house unless you would prefer a chaperone, and if that is the case, I would be delighted to show you around. I've got some brochures I can give you," I said, handing the Sinclairs some pamphlets that they took from me gratefully. "Lovely," said Mrs. Sinclair, opening up the glossy brochure approvingly to examine it. Her eyes twinkled with delight, like a kid looking at the doughnuts on offer in a bakery. "So it's all here, is it?" she asked me. "All the information I might want to know about the house?" "Yes, all the details are included. From the asking price to the sizes of rooms, etc., etc. It tells you the entire layout of the property, including the woods, the ponds, the stable blocks, and so forth." "Lovely! Oh, thank you so very much. And you must be the agent for this house, is that right? I was under the impression it was a Mr. Now, what is his name? You must forgive me. I'm so dreadfully bad with names. Ah, yes, it was Philip Wensleydale I was supposed to be seeing today." "I'm very sorry, ma'am, but Philip Wensleydale is indisposed at the moment. And my father was supposed to be presenting Dogwood Manor on his behalf today, but he's also been called out on a family emergency at the very last minute. So he's asked me to chaperone people around Dogwood Manor. My name is Parker Vermicelli. I'm the son of Lawrence Vermicelli." "So the man I spoke to was Philip Wensleydale, is that right? I spoke to him on the phone. He was the one that told me all about Dogwood Manor." "That's right, it would have been Philip Wensleydale. He's the other agent that works with my father. Sadly, he's come down with appendicitis." "Oh, poor, poor man. He has my deepest sympathies. I hope he makes a swift recovery." "It's very good to meet you, Mrs. Sinclair," I said, shaking her hand politely. "Likewise, it's very good to meet you, Parker, and it would be great if you would show me and my husband around this sprawling property. The question is, where do we start? I'm completely spoiled for choice. How about the drawing room? Shall we go in there first?" I realized that these were the people my father had been telling me about, who would be likely to buy a house like Dogwood Manor, with just a flick of the fingers and with a nudge here and a wink there. Could I dare to hope I'd have a sale before the day was out? I could only cross my fingers and toes and pray a silent, earnest prayer that fate would smile down on me generously on this open day at Dogwood Manor. I could show my father then what I was made of. I delighted in envisaging his awed expression when I told him I'd made a sale while he was overseeing his sister at the hospital. When I look back all these years later, I realize that as a young teenager, I wanted nothing more in the entire world than to make my father proud of me. The true reality was that Dogwood Manor sold itself to the Sinclairs. Even if I'd been mucking out the stables and looked like something the cat had dragged in, I can honestly say without a shadow of doubt that nothing would have put off Mrs. Sinclair from buying Dogwood Manor. The way that woman was looking at the place, with eyes in attendance to every single detail, and with such an animated expression, as if she was all but a child caught up in a fairy tale. That was the look that she was wearing on her face the entire time. "This house is absolutely gorgeous. There are no words. It's gorgeous. I never anticipated this in a million years. It's in marvellous condition. I mean, of course, Mr. Wensleydale told me all about the house. He said I would love it. But I never knew it required so little work. It's a big house, but it's still manageable, and that's incredibly appealing." Mr. Sinclair nodded his head in approval. "I knew bringing my wife to Dogwood Manor would be a very, very unfortunate thing to do. I knew she'd want to buy it almost at once." He chuckled. "Well, I just love houses of history, don't I?" said Mrs. Sinclair. "I am passionate, Parker, about old houses. They have so much charm and character, don't they? I can see this place is in first-class condition. And just standing here, taking it all in, I'm taken straight back to the 1800s almost at once. I feel completely underdressed in this house, as if I should immediately put on a very glamorous gown. I can imagine the parties we could have in this place, Wiseman," she said, turning around to talk to her husband. "This is such a desirable house to purchase. It's in apple pie condition, just how I like it. Oh dear, didn't I tell you, Parker? Bringing my wife here was a classic mistake. I think she's in love with this place." "Of course I'm in love with it, Wiseman. I really want to sell our place in old Louisville. I want to move in here right away." "See, I told you, Parker. My wife would love nothing more than to be lady of the manor," chuckled Wiseman Sinclair. "I can't say I'm surprised. I knew one day she'd find the house of her dreams. And when we drove up the driveway and I saw Dogwood Manor, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt we'd found that house." "Does that mean a celebration is in order?" I asked. "Oh, absolutely," said Mr. Sinclair. "Show me the dotted line, and I will sign on it." I was not disappointed, as by the time my father returned from the hospital to affirm that my Aunt Ivy was going to be absolutely fine, there was a sale on the table from the Sinclairs. I dare say my father was impressed. He said to me, "I think I should leave you to your own devices more often, son." Although how you managed to sell Dogwood Manor, looking that dishevelled, I honestly don't know. What on earth have you done to your jacket? It's all torn up." "Oh, this," I said. "I snagged it on some thorny briars." I decided not to tell my father what had really happened, and about my rather strange, outlandish encounter with a Bigfoot. "How did you manage to do that, son?" he asked me. "You're selling a house, not going for an intrepid adventure in the woods, are you?" I shrugged my shoulders nonchalantly, and luckily my father did not press me for any information in regards to the matter. I think he was simply happy we had a sale on the table, and that the O'Reillys at long last had a cash buyer. After their very first open day, it certainly didn't get better than that. I was soon to learn that the Sinclairs had moved into Dogwood Manor at the earliest convenience and were absolutely thrilled with the property, and I couldn't blame them for that. It was a month later, after the sale for Dogwood Manor, that I discovered in my jacket pocket the key to the front door of the house. It was a beautiful key, and I knew that I needed to return it as soon as possible. Donald Sinclair, 10-year-old son of Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair, and twin brother Errol. I was 10 years old at the time, with an identical twin brother called Errol. We'd been living at Dogwood Manor for an entire month, and me and my brother loved our brand new home, with its sprawling woodgroves and feelings of endless space, which was a far cry from the renovated Victorian home we had lived in old Louisville. One night my mother had put us to bed to read us a story. It was about 6:30 in the evening, and she insisted we had an early night, as she always did. I'd been unable to get to sleep, but my brother Errol was already snoring. The moment he'd hit the pillow, he was out like a light, which was not unusual for him. I guess I was still adapting to the changes in our living arrangements. I lay there in bed, feeling bored and frustrated. I was struggling to find the sleep that eluded me. I stared up vacantly at the ornate ceiling above my head, as the night light on the landing tossed away the sinister dark shadows, so that me and my brother would not be too scared or intimidated to make trips to the toilet during the night. In my restless tossing and turning ordeal under the bed-sheets, I soon became aware of the indignant voices coming from downstairs. One of the voices had a shrill edge over the other. It was obviously my mother's voice. I knew at once my parents were having a heated altercation. This was a first for them, as in truth they hardly ever so much as raised their voices to each other. My mother was quite a dominating character in our household, and what she said my father would genuinely go along with, just to keep the peace. My father was an easy-going, fun-loving person. He loathed confrontation and discord of any kind. So to a degree he would appease my mother, unless he really needed to put his foot down about something. I hurriedly climbed out of bed, wearing my cute blue flannel pyjamas. I ran over to my brother's bed and shook him as hard as I could. "Wake up! Wake up, Errol! Wake up! I think Mummy and Daddy are having a fight." My brother sat up sharply from his bed, wiping the sleep from his eyes. He looked somewhat bemused and rather disorientated. "What's going on?" he asked. "Are you deaf, Errol? I told you that Mummy and Daddy are having a fight downstairs." My words got his prompt attention. It was rather like saying to him that it was snowing in an arid desert somewhere, as that was how rare fighting was between my parents. My brother's eyes grew wide with a curious intrigue. We both were hankering to know what it was that was causing my parents such conflict. We hastily put on our slippers and dressing gowns and gingerly trotted down the staircase as quietly as we could. The door of the library, which was opposite the staircase, was slightly ajar. A light was on the inside, and me and my brother could hear the argument flaring through the open door like a frenzied wild wind. My mother's shrill voice was like a loud, piercing whistle, but what got me and Errol's attention was that the fight was about us. "Wiseman, I say we should send them to 2 different schools," I heard my mother saying defiantly. "I spoke to Donald's teacher, Mrs. Augustine. She's a lovely lady. She doesn't believe that Errol can shine because Donald is the dominant one of the 2. She says he answers all the questions in class and always speaks up for Errol. She says that Errol shrinks into the background during class. He becomes ambiguously obscure. I don't want that for our children, Wiseman. I want them both to shine like twinkling stars in their own unique way, and to appreciate their own individuality. But that is not going to happen unless they're at different schools. That's what they need, Wiseman. They need to go to 2 different schools, don't you see? It makes perfect sense to me." "I will have nothing of the kind like that happen. I want our children to shine as much as you do, darling. But sending them to 2 separate schools is absolutely ridiculous. And beyond that, it is completely impractical. Errol and Donald are as thick as 2 thieves. They will not appreciate being separated, and being forced to go to different schools. You and I know very well that separating the twins is not an option. They would not be happy about that for a second. It's not about what they want, Wiseman, nor is it about what we want. It's about what is best for the twins. You know what a dominant character Donald is. He can't help himself. He takes over everything. You mean he's like you? Came my father's sarcastic voice. He likes to control things, is that what you're saying? Well, that's a maybe. I do admit that Donald takes after me. He's much more assertive than Errol is. But the point is that Errol is being crushed. Don't you see where I'm going with this? No, I don't see where you're going with this. Because Errol is not being crushed. Where are you getting this from? You're allowing that teacher, Mrs. Augustine, to feed you all kinds of weird ideas. You know that Errol is the quieter and the more demure of the two twins. He is reflectful and thoughtful. He doesn't talk a lot because he's a deep thinker. He likes the fact that Donald, his brother, is more outgoing than he is. Donald helps him to step out of his comfort zone when things get awkward. They're two individualistic personalities that complement each other. That is what I'm trying to tell you, Wiseman, and I wish you would get what I'm saying. How on earth is our Errol ever going to flourish in life with Donald being so dominant all the time? No, we need to split them up. It's the best idea all around as far as I'm concerned. When me and my brother heard what my parents were arguing about, we both knew my mother would win this argument, and that inevitably me and my brother would be split up. If you have ever been a twin, you will know that such an idea is absolutely nonsensical. Yes, it was true. I was much more outgoing than my brother Errol was. He was much more subservient and demure than me. I didn't make him hide his light under a bushel by any manner of means, as my mother claimed. My brother was reticent and bashful by nature, and attending another school without me at his side would have made him shrink further into his shell. Furthermore, my father was absolutely right. We would never be remotely happy if we were separated from each other. It was in that poignant moment that me and my brother Errol knew exactly what we had to do. We had no choice in the matter but to run away from Dogwood Manor, despite the fact that we had grown to love our new home. But for us, nothing was more worse in the entire world than being separated from each other. We thought we would go to my grandmother Ella's house, who was my father's mother. She lived in old Louisville, a few streets away from our old home. We would tell her what my mother intended to do to us. My grandmother did not remotely approve of some of my mother's choices in raising us. We often heard her express her extreme misgivings, especially when it came to any ideas of separating us, as she was strongly adverse to that, and believed that as twins we belonged together. She had made her opinions to my mother very clear. Me and my brother knew we could go to her and have her on side, but the question was, how did we get to old Louisville from here? If need be, we would move in with her. That was my thinking at the time. My brother, who was more practical than I was, looked up online, and although we realized it would be a long walk to old Louisville, we found there were buses en route that we could take. Once we walked to a certain point, that is, where we could finally get to grandmother's house. We knew that our grandmother would protect us from our mother's insane idea about splitting us up and make us go to two separate schools. We could not allow that to happen by any manner of means. We have to go to Grandma's house. We're going to have to live with her now. We have to leave Dogwood Manor, I told my brother. You know what Mummy's like. She'll separate us. She always wins all her arguments with Daddy. Daddy will let her do what she wants, and we'll be forced to be apart. She'll split us up, I know she will. We have to go to Granny's. It's our only choice. My brother nodded in agreement. We have to go. I can't go to school without you, Donald. And you won't have to, 'cause no one is ever going to split us up, and that's a promise. Cross my heart, hope to die if I tell a lie. Of course, I was very sad to leave Dogwood Manor and the fabulous home that we'd lived in for an entire month. But me and my brother Errol knew very well we had no choice, but we had to leave. So while my parents argued among ourselves, we hurriedly got dressed into jeans and sweaters. We took a couple of flashlights with us for our intrepid journey, some pocket money we'd saved up for our bus rides, and a few snacks from the refrigerator that we might need. We put those in a duffel bag, and we quietly slunk out of the house like two furtive burglars, without my parents being any the wiser. We slipped through a patio door on the wraparound porch, where we trailed through the front yard. I do recall their arguing continued as we left. I heard my father say, "Let's see what my mother has to say about this. She does not believe in our children being separated. She says our twins belong together." "Your mother does not know what's best for our children, Wiseman. I assure you, Mrs. Augustine knows exactly what she's talking about. She's had lots of experience with children over the years. I think being separated will do them both the world of good." At 10 years old, walking through the trees in the middle of the night was certainly a daunting prospect for the both of us. We gingerly followed the long winding driveway. It was so tenebrific that I was beginning to feel rather scared, but I was resolutely determined not to show Errol how unhinged I really felt. Maybe we should have slipped out at first light, as walking around in the darkness was not the wisest decision, but it was too late now to backtrack on our decision. We were out of the house now, and going back didn't seem like a great idea. If we were to return to our beds, we would not be able to get a wink of sleep, so we might as well make tracks now, and get to my grandmother's house as soon as we possibly could. I certainly didn't want to stay in the grand mansion. Knowing what my mother was planning for the both of us, the thought made me sick to my stomach. I was already feeling wretchedly nauseous. I wanted to throw up the contents of my stomach, but I fought against those physical urges. Me and Errol were feeling incredibly aggrieved over my parents' conversation, and that drove us further forward. As being 10-year-old kids, we both very well knew that we would have no say in regards to the matter. "I'm really scared," said my brother Errol. "I think we should go back, but I don't want to go back. But I want to go back, because I don't like it. It's so dark out here. I can't see anything." "Do you want Mummy to separate us?" I asked my brother. "Do you want to go to school without me? Because if we stay at Dogwood Manor, that's what's going to happen. Mum will win her argument. She always does, and we'll be split up. Do you want that, Errol?" "Of course I don't want it." "Well, then we need to get to Grandma's house as soon as we can. Granny won't separate us. We can live with her." "But can't we leave first thing in the morning when it gets light?" my brother asked me. "We don't want Mum and Dad to see us, do we? We can use the darkness to get ahead. They will be asleep in bed. We have a head start. And if we go back, we won't even be able to sleep anyway, because we'll be worrying about going away, about running away. And what if our parents see us do that? We can't let that happen. If we go now, they won't have any idea what we're up to. But it's so dark, and I'm so scared." It was as we scrambled through the tall, lofty trees of the woodgrove to take a quick shortcut through the woods to get to a main road that strange things began to happen, things we couldn't explain. We were guided by the light of our torch and suddenly realized that something or someone was following us. But who? We walked down the path with our hearts thundering in our chests. We heard twigs breaking and snapping. It scared us half to death because we weren't making that sound. My only thought was that we needed to get to the road as quickly as we possibly could. I felt that we would be safer on the road. We began to scuttle rather precariously down the earthen paths over the debris of fallen leaf litter, like two blind dung beetles, not really knowing where we were going. I wanted to sing Hallelujah when we finally reached the road. That was when we both saw her. I had never anticipated such a bizarre, outlandish encounter like this. The creature was robustly built, like a formidable army tank. She was large as she was wide, with ponderous shoulders. She had a distinctive bullet-shaped head and a face that was startlingly human. I knew I was seeing a Bigfoot. I was absolutely terrified, as everything about this imposing creature made me aware of how inconspicuously small I was by contrast. I felt like an ant in the presence of an elephant. The creature's eyes were giving off an intimidating yellow eye-shine. I was scared to look into those eyes, in case she saw my stares as a threat. I had heard bad stories about Bigfoot encounters before, and this creature seemed to be very interested in us, and her curiosity over us scared me half to death. What did she want with us, I wondered. I kept hearing in my head, "Where are you going? You mustn't go away. It's not safe." I didn't know where the strange voice was coming from, but it was not my own. But I knew that me and my brother needed to get away from this creature, but I didn't fancy our chances of escaping her. She was so powerful, she looked like she could easily outrun a seasoned athlete. It was possibly about 9 o'clock at night, or thereabouts. There might be an occasional car, if we were lucky, driving down this road, although it was usually pretty sequestered, but we could live in hope. If that happened, we could stop the car, ask for help, and hopefully escape the Bigfoot. "It's a Bigfoot!" I cried out to my brother. "Run! Run!" We began to run down the road. The Bigfoot began to give us chase, and was gaining ground on us. I kept hearing in my head, "Stop! Come back! I'm not going to hurt you!" At this point in time, my heart was pounding violently in my chest, my whole body trembling like a jelly. I heard a voice screaming in my head again, "Please stop!" All of a sudden, I saw a car driving down the road. It was like a gift from God. The Bigfoot turned around and ran towards some trees, where she took cover behind one of them, and watched us. I began to wave madly. I was so afraid the Bigfoot might hurt us and come after us because she was so big. The car was our hope of certain escape. The car looked like a four-wheel drive vehicle. It promptly stopped, and I felt huge relief. The young man in the car wound down his window and said, "Are you kids all right? It's 9 o'clock at night. What are you doing wandering around on the road like this? Get into the car. I'll take you home. Where do you live?" "We live at Dogwood Manor. It's not far from here," I told the young man. "I can show you where to go." We both gratefully climbed into the car seat beside him. Suddenly I felt rather safe. Going home seemed like a good idea. I nervously looked over my shoulders while sitting in the car towards the woods to see if I could observe the female Bigfoot. I was hoping she was long gone, but she was still there, standing behind a tree, watching us. I heard a voice in my head saying, "Don't do that again. I've got better things to do with my time than run after naughty children. Make sure you go home." I was rather confused because I suddenly realized that the female Bigfoot was talking to me. I watched her turning around and gliding back into the woods, and I realized then and there that she didn't impose a threat to us at all. She had been watching over us, worried about us because we'd been running away from home. "You say you're from Dogwood Manor? How extraordinary. It's a small world because that's where I'm going right now. You must both be the Sinclair twins." "We are the Sinclair twins, but why are you going to Dogwood Manor at this late time of night? My mother never receives late visitors." "Well, it's a long story, I'm afraid. My name is Parker Vermicelli. My father's name is Lawrence Vermicelli. He sells real estate for a living. But on the day your parents both came to view Dogwood Manor, a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of selling the place to them. My father was otherwise indisposed at the time. The other day when I sent my suit off to be repaired, I discovered that I still had the front door key to Dogwood Manor in my pocket. And it's no ordinary key. It has been beautifully handcrafted. They don't make keys like this anymore, so I knew I needed to return it to your parents forthwith. I phoned your mother this afternoon and told her I'd be passing this way a little later in the evening, And did she mind if I dropped off the key then? She said it would be absolutely fine. And then, by lucky chance, I run into the both of you. Are you going to tell me what you're doing on the road in the middle of the night? Are you running away from home?"
"We are running away from home. Please don't take us back there, sir. Can you drop us off at our grandmother? She lives in the old Louisville area. It would be better if you dropped us off there. Would you mind dreadfully doing that? We would really appreciate it, sir."
"But why would you want me to do that?"
"My mother wants to separate the both of us. We're twins and we don't want to be separated. She wants to send us to 2 different schools, and we don't want that."
"Of course you don't want that. I understand you both want to run away. I did at one point when I was your age, so I understand where you're coming from. But why would you want to do that? You'll only cause your parents great distress. They'll be wondering where you are."
"My mother wants to separate us. We're twins. She wants to send us to different schools. We don't want that, sir."
"Of course you don't want that. I tell you what, I'll talk to your mother for you. My father was a twin. His parents tried to separate the both of them, and it was a catastrophic mistake. How about I take you back to Dogwood Manor, and I'll speak to your mother for you about this matter."
"But how do you know she'll listen to you, sir? She always wins her arguments with my father. She always gets her way in absolutely everything."
"I will speak to her, because I know exactly what happens when you split up twins. It's not a good idea. I promise I'll speak to your mother. I'll do my best to persuade her to keep you two together." I do not remember all the details of that night, when Mr. Vermicelli dropped us off at home. My mother was mortified that me and my brother had tried to run away. When she learnt that Mr. Vermicelli had seen us on the road, and had waved him down because we were so afraid, we even told her about the Bigfoot that had followed us when we left the property, but my mother didn't believe a word of it. "For goodness sake, don't be so ridiculous. There is no such thing as Bigfoot. Your imagination is playing tricks on you. But you brought this on yourself, wandering around in the dark in the middle of the night like that. What on earth were you thinking?"
On hearing my conversation with my mother, Mr. Vermicelli took me to one side very discreetly, when my mother didn't appear to notice, and whispered in my ear, "I believe you about the Bigfoot you encountered, but don't you worry about the creature. She will definitely not hurt you. I've seen her myself on this property, playing with a little girl. She may look intimidating and scary, but believe me, she's very nice. She was probably rather worried about you, running off in the middle of the night the way you did." "I know, sir. She told me in her head a similar thing, actually." "There you go, then," said Mr. Vermicelli, looking pleased. My mother, on the other hand, was not remotely pleased with me, or with our insubordinate behaviour, while my father was wearing a rather smug I-told-you-so look on his face. "I don't understand why the two of you would run off like that, Donald," my mother cried out indignantly, focusing the blame entirely on me, like she always did. She believed I led my brother Errol astray with my wild, fanciful ideas, and in truth I probably did. "Why would you do such a silly thing, running off like that? You're very lucky that Mr. Vermicelli here saw you in the road and brought you safely back here. Me and your father thought you were fast asleep in bed, the both of you, and all the time you were running away from home. I thought you liked it here at Dogwood Manor." "I like it here, Mum, but I don't want you to split me and Errol up. I heard you say that you'd send us to separate schools, and you can't do that to us. We were going to live with Granny, 'cause she'd never send us to separate schools. Me and Errol want to be together." "So that's why you ran away, is it?" asked my mother. "You overheard me and your father talking about this matter together. So that's what this is all about." "I told you, love," said my father Lawrence. "This wild idea of splitting up our children and sending them to separate schools is never going to work. It's not practical either. Look at the way they ran away from home tonight. Based on what you were suggesting,
It was a preposterous idea from the very beginning, and you know it, and I know it."
"Take it from me, Mrs. Sinclair," said Mr. Vermicelli. "I don't wish to intrude, but I want to speak on your children's behalf, if I may. I do believe they will run away from home again if you try to separate them. I speak from experience, you see. My father and his brother were identical twins, and my father's mother had similar bright ideas about splitting them up. They were always repetitively running away from home, until my parents promptly decided to keep them together. It was the best decision they could have made. You would be wise to do the very same thing."
"Oh dear, it looks as if I've really been put in my place," said my mother, looking quite put out by the whole affair, while my father looked like the cat who'd got all the cream. I'm glad to say that my mother listened to Mr. Vermicelli, and me and my brother were never split up during our childhood. And although I never saw the female Bigfoot again, I know that if we had attempted to run away from home, we probably would have seen her, as throughout my childhood, when we played out of doors, especially in the woodgrove, I always knew the Bigfoot was watching over us. Me and my brother would always sense her presence. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.